Hey Dead Signal FM viewers, getting ready for bed? Wishing you a calm and cozy night. Before we start, where are you watching from and what time is it? Let's get started. The Hollow Between, Part 1, Homecoming. Rhonda Bishop never intended to return to Millfield. The thought of the small Maine town made her stomach tighten and her temples throb. But her father's funeral had left her no choice. As her Subaru crested Hammond Hill, the valley opened up before her. A sprawl of clapboard houses and maple trees showing their first hints of autumn color. The quarry sat on the northern edge of town, its still waters a perfect mirror reflecting the granite cliffs and dark pines that surrounded it. In the evening light, the sight might have been beautiful if not for the memories it stirred. Are we there yet? Her 13-year-old daughter, Emma, looked up from her phone. This would be Emma's first time in the town where Rhonda had grown up, where Rhonda had sworn she'd never set foot again. Almost, honey. Rhonda gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles whitening. Just another few minutes. The town's welcome sign flashed by, "Welcome to Millfield, where stone runs deep." The quarry had been Millfield's economic heart for generations before it was abandoned. Now it was just a water-filled hole where teenagers went to drink and swim on hot summer nights. Where her brother had drowned 25 years ago. The car's engine groaned as they descended into the valley. Rhonda tried to focus on the road, but her attention kept drifting to the rearview mirror. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them, a presence that had been just out of sight since they'd crossed the state line. A dark smudge at the periphery of her vision that disappeared whenever she turned to look directly at it. Her father's house sat at the end of Sycamore Lane, a Victorian monstrosity that had always been too big for their family of four, and certainly too big for her father after everyone else had gone. The white paint was peeling, the porch sagging under the weight of neglect. Rhonda parked in the gravel driveway and shut off the engine. This is where Grandpa lived? Emma wrinkled her nose. It's kind of creepy. He left it to you, technically. Rhonda attempted a smile. So it's your creepy house now. Thanks, but no thanks. We'll get it cleaned up and sold as quickly as possible. Rhonda climbed out of the car, her legs stiff from the 8-hour drive from New York. We just need to sort through his things, meet with the lawyer, and then we can leave. The wind picked up as they approached the front porch, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else. Something sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun. Emma recoiled. What's that smell? Rhonda inhaled and tasted copper on the back of her tongue. Probably just the septic tank. This place hasn't been properly maintained in years. The key stuck in the front door lock, requiring a hard jiggle before the tumblers finally gave way. The door swung open with a groan that seemed to reverberate through the entire house. Inside, dust motes danced in the half-light filtering through grimy windows. The foyer opened to a grand staircase, its banister gleaming dully despite the dust. To the left was the parlor with furniture draped in white sheets, ghostly forms in the gloom. To the right, the dining room with its long oak table still set for dinner. 4 places, as though the family were expected to sit down together at any moment. Why are there 4 plates? Emma asked. I thought Grandpa lived alone. Rhonda frowned. He did, for over 2 decades. She moved to the table and ran her finger along the edge of a china plate. Clean, no dust, as if someone had set the table recently. Maybe Mrs. Cranmer did this. She was helping him with meals toward the end. But that didn't explain the 4 place settings. Her father, alone for years after her mother's death. For plates, as if waiting for a family that no longer existed. Emma wandered into the kitchen while Rhonda stared at the dining room table, unable to shake the sense of wrongness. When she heard her daughter's sharp intake of breath, she hurried to the kitchen. What's wrong? Emma pointed to the refrigerator door, where several children's drawings were held in place by magnets. Crayon figures with exaggerated smiles standing in front of a blue-roofed house. A lopsided dog. A tree with red apples. Those aren't mine, Emma said. Are they yours? From when you were a kid? Rhonda stepped closer, her heart hammering. The paper was fresh, not yellowed with age. The crayon marks vivid. At the bottom of one drawing, in childish scrawl, To Grandpa, love Emma. I never sent Grandpa any drawings, Emma said. I've never even met him. Rhonda snatched the pictures from the refrigerator, her hands trembling. This isn't funny. Mom, I swear. I'm not blaming you. Rhonda crumpled the drawings and threw them in the trash. Someone's playing a sick joke. She moved to the back door and checked the lock. Secure. Then she went to the basement door, also locked. The feeling of being watched intensified, as if eyes were peering at her through the windows, from the dark corners of the kitchen, from the basement beyond the door. Let's get our bags and settle in, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. It's getting late. They brought in their luggage, and Rhonda led Emma upstairs to what had once been her childhood bedroom. The faded floral wallpaper was the same, as was the white wooden bed frame, but the mattress looked new. On the pillow sat a teddy bear, worn, with one missing eye and stuffing poking through a tear in its paw. Mr. Snuffles? Rhonda's voice caught in her throat. She picked up the bear with trembling fingers. What is it, Mom? This was mine when I was little. I thought I'd lost it before I left Millfield. She turned the bear over in her hands. The scent of childhood emanated from its fur, a mixture of baby powder and the lavender sachets her mother used to place in the dresser drawers. Dad must have found it and kept it all these years. Something warm trickled down her cheek. She wiped away the tear with the back of her hand. Are you okay? Emma asked. Just tired. Rhonda set the bear back on the pillow. You take this room. I'll sleep in the master bedroom. They unpacked in silence. Rhonda couldn't stop thinking about the place settings in the dining room and the drawings on the refrigerator. She had spoken to her father only once or twice a year, perfunctory phone calls on holidays and birthdays. He had never met Emma. The cancer had progressed too quickly at the end for them to visit before he died. Who would have put those drawings up? And why? After Emma had settled in, Rhonda went to her father's room. It smelled of illness and antiseptic, a hospital room transposed into a home. The hospice nurse had cleaned up after his death, but evidence of his final days remained. Prescription bottles on the nightstand, a hospital bed in place of the old four-poster, a walker folded against the wall. She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. Through the window, she could see the quarry glittering in the distance, catching the last rays of sunlight. Behind the water's tranquil surface lurked memories she'd spent decades trying to forget. A floorboard creaked somewhere in the house. Rhonda straightened, listening. Another creak from the direction of the stairs. Footsteps moving slowly, deliberately upward. She rose and moved to the doorway. Emma, no response. The footsteps continued, reaching the landing. Emma, if you're trying to scare me, it's not funny. Silence. Then more footsteps, now moving down the hallway toward her father's room. Toward her. Rhonda stepped into the hall. Empty. The footsteps had stopped. At the far end of the corridor, Emma's door was closed. Emma? She called, louder now. Emma's door opened and her daughter appeared, wireless earbuds in her ears. What? Were you just in the hallway? No, I've been listening to music. Emma pulled out one earbud. Why? I thought I heard someone walking up the stairs. Maybe the house is settling? Emma suggested. Old houses make weird noises. Maybe. But Rhonda knew the difference between a settling house and footsteps. She'd grown up here. She knew every creak and groan. These had been footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps ascending the stairs and moving down the hall. I'm going to check the rest of the house, she said. Make sure everything's locked up. She went from room to room, checking windows and doors, looking for signs of intrusion. Everything was secure. In the back of her mind, a voice whispered, "You know what this is. You know it never went away." Outside, darkness had fallen. The quarry was no longer visible, swallowed by night. But Rhonda could feel it out there. A presence as tangible as the house around her, watching, waiting. That night, she dreamed of the water. She was 10 years old again, standing at the quarry's edge. Her brother, Danny, 16 and full of the reckless confidence of youth, balanced on the cliff above the deepest part of the water. "Don't," she called. It's too high. Danny just laughed. Don't be such a baby, Ron. I've done this jump a dozen times. But not in October, when the water was cold enough to shock the system. Not when the quarry was angry. Yes, she'd always thought of the quarry as having moods, emotions. Sometimes it was placid, welcoming. Other times it seemed to seethe with malevolence. Today, the water looked almost black, its surface unnaturally still, as if holding its breath in anticipation. "Danny, please," she begged. He spread his arms wide, grinning down at her. "Watch this." And then he leapt, his body arcing gracefully against the sky before piercing the water's surface. 1 second, 2, 3. Danny didn't resurface. Rhonda screamed his name, ran along the shore, searching the water for any sign of him. Nothing, just ripples gradually fading until the surface was calm again, a mirror reflecting her own terrified face. Then something broke the surface, not Danny, but a hand. A small, pale hand reaching up from the depths. A child's hand, beckoning. Rhonda awoke with a gasp, her nightgown soaked with sweat. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m., the witching hour her grandmother would have called it. The time when the veil between worlds was thinnest. A sound from downstairs made her freeze. The clink of silverware against china. Chairs scraping against hardwood. Voices murmuring. She slipped from bed, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. The hallway was pitch black, the darkness so complete it seemed to have substance, pressing against her skin as she felt her way toward the stairs. At the top of the staircase, she paused. Light spilled from the dining room below, casting long shadows up the steps. The voices continued, multiple voices engaged in conversation, though she couldn't make out the words. A man's deep baritone, a woman's softer tones, a teenage boy, his voice cracking between notes, and a child, high-pitched and excitable. A family dinner at 3:17 in the morning. Rhonda descended one step, then another, clinging to the banister. As she neared the bottom, the voices became clearer. A good day at school? The man's voice, her father's voice, she realized with a jolt. Mrs. Kelvin said my science project was the best in class. The child's voice was eerily familiar. That's my girl. The woman now, her mother, dead for 23 years. And Danny, how was baseball practice? Coach says I might start at the next game. The teenage boy, her brother, who had drowned in the quarry while she watched, helpless. And what about you, Rhonda? Her father again. You've been so quiet tonight. Rhonda froze, one foot suspended above the next step. They knew she was there. They were talking to her. She forced herself to continue down the stairs, drawn by a compulsion stronger than fear. At the bottom, she turned toward the dining room, for place settings around the table, for chairs, all empty. The room was bright with light, though no lamps were on. The voices had stopped. On one of the plates sat a puddle of dark water, dripping slowly onto the polished wood of the table. As Rhonda watched, it formed a small rivulet that ran to the edge and fell, drop by drop, to the floor. Plink, plink, plink. A sound behind her, the front door opening, a gust of night air carrying the scent of earth and decay. When she turned, there was nothing but darkness, the door still firmly shut and locked. Rhonda backed away from the dining room, then ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time. She didn't stop until she reached Emma's room, pushing the door open without knocking. Emma was asleep, one arm flung above her head, breathing evenly. The teddy bear, Mr. Snuffles, sat on the nightstand, watching over her with its one glass eye. Rhonda collapsed into the armchair in the corner, determined to keep vigil until morning. She must have dozed despite her best intentions, because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows and Emma was shaking her awake. Mom? Why are you sleeping in my room? Rhonda blinked, disoriented. I thought I heard something downstairs last night. Wanted to make sure you were okay. Emma frowned. Like an intruder? No, nothing like that. Rhonda rubbed her face, trying to gather her thoughts. Just the house settling, like you said. But they both knew it had been more than that. after a hasty breakfast of cereal found in the pantry. Unexpectedly fresh, as if someone had been grocery shopping recently, they began the task of sorting through Calvin Bishop's belongings. The lawyer, Mr. Herschel, was expected that afternoon to discuss the will and the disposition of the property. While Emma tackled the bookshelves in the study, Rhonda went through her father's desk. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of unpaid bills, she found a journal bound in cracked leather. Her father's name was embossed on the cover in faded gold leaf. The journal's pages were filled with her father's cramped handwriting, the entries dated over the past 5 years. Rhonda flipped to a random page from about 2 years prior. March 15th. They came again last night. All of them. Louisa looked just as she did the day I met her, young and beautiful. Danny, forever 16. And little Rhonda, still a child, though I know she's a grown woman now with a daughter of her own somewhere out there in the world. They sat at the table and talked as if no time had passed, as if death hadn't claimed most of them, as if the quarry hadn't taken them. Yes, I know it now. The quarry took them all in different ways. It took Danny directly, swallowing him into its depths. It took Louisa through grief, wearing her down until pneumonia could claim her. And it took Rhonda by driving her away, filling her with such fear that she fled and never returned. Only I remain, and not for much longer. The cancer is spreading faster than the doctors expected. Soon I'll join my family at that table permanently. Part of me welcomes it. Part of me fears what comes after. The quarry is hungry. It has always been hungry, and I've fed it for too long. Rhonda closed the journal, her hands shaking. Her father had been hallucinating at the end, she told herself. The cancer had spread to his brain, causing delusions. That was the rational explanation, but it didn't explain the place settings at the dining room table. It didn't explain the voices she'd heard last night, or the puddle of quarry water dripping onto the floor. She flipped to the final entry, dated just days before her father's death. October 2nd. Rhonda is coming. I've seen her in my dreams, driving up Hammond Hill with a young girl beside her. My granddaughter, whom I've never met. They'll arrive after I'm gone, but the house will be waiting for them. The quarry will be waiting. I've tried to warn her. I've sent letters that were returned unopened, made phone calls that went to voicemail. Now it's too late. The hollow between worlds is growing thinner. They slip through more easily now, staying longer each time. Soon the barrier will collapse entirely, and then, God help us all. If by some miracle these words reach you, Rhonda, take Emma and leave. Don't spend a single night in this house. The quarry knows you're coming. It has been patient all these years, but its patience is at an end. It wants what it's owed. A life for a life. That was the bargain struck long ago, before my time, when the first stone was cut from the earth. I'm sorry, my darling girl. I'm so sorry for what's coming. Rhonda closed the journal and pressed it to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. Outside, clouds had gathered, casting the room into shadow. Through the window, she could see the quarry in the distance, its waters dark and still under the overcast sky. She needed to get Emma and leave now today before nightfall, before whatever lived in the hollow between worlds came for them again. Part 2. The Depths. The lawyer was late. Rhonda paced the length of the parlor, checking her watch every few minutes. Mr. Herschel had promised to arrive by 3 o'clock, but it was now nearly 4, and there was still no sign of him. Outside, the weather had deteriorated rapidly. What had started as an overcast day had transformed into an early autumn storm, with wind lashing the trees and rain hammering against the windows. The electricity had flickered several times, but had so far remained on. Maybe he's not coming because of the storm, Emma suggested. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by old photo albums she discovered in a cedar chest. These pictures are weird, Mom. Rhonda knelt beside her daughter. The open album showed faded Polaroids from the 1970s, before Rhonda was born. Her father, much younger, standing with a group of men at the edge of the quarry. They were posed formally, as if commemorating some event, their expressions solemn. That's Grandpa, right? Emma pointed to Calvin Bishop. Who are the others? Town elders, I think. Rhonda studied the faces. That's Old Man Griggs, who ran the general store. And that's Mayor Holcomb. This one might be Dr. Warner, but I'm not sure. She turned the page. More photos of the quarry, these showing some kind of ceremony. Men in dark suits standing in a circle around what appeared to be a small cairn of stones near the water's edge. Candles burning despite the daylight. What were they doing? Emma asked. I don't know. Rhonda had never seen these photographs before. Some kind of civic dedication, maybe? The quarry was the town's main source of employment for generations. She turned another page and froze. This photo showed her father alone at the quarry's edge, holding something in his cupped hands. The image was blurry, as if the photographer's hands had been shaking, but she could make out her father's expression. A mixture of terror and resignation as he extended his hands toward the water, offering whatever he held to the depths. The next several pages had been torn out, leaving jagged edges behind. A sudden pounding at the front door made them both jump. Rhonda slammed the album shut and rose to her feet. That must be Mr. Herschel, she said, though the forceful knocking seemed at odds with the elderly lawyer's demeanor as she remembered it. She opened the front door to find not Mr. Herschel, but a middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair plastered to her head by the rain. She wore a yellow slicker and clutched a casserole dish covered in foil. Thank God, the woman said. I was beginning to think no one was here. Rhonda hesitated. Can I help you? Rhonda? Rhonda Bishop. The woman peered at her through rain-spotted glasses. It's me, Susan. Susan Cranmer. I used to help your father. Recognition dawned slowly. Susan Cranmer had been a few years ahead of Rhonda in school, one of the popular girls who'd never given her the time of day. Now here she was, middle-aged and concerned, bringing what appeared to be a sympathy casserole. Susan, yes. Sorry, it's been a long time. Rhonda stepped back to let her in. This is my daughter, Emma. Susan smiled at Emma, then turned worried eyes to Rhonda. I tried calling when I heard you were coming, but the number your father had wasn't working. I wanted to warn you not to come back here. Warn me? Rhonda's skin prickled. Why? Susan glanced at Emma, then back to Rhonda. Maybe we could talk privately? There are some things about your father's final days that you should know. Rhonda nodded. Emma, honey, could you take Mrs. Cranmer's dish to the kitchen? And maybe put on some hot water for tea? Once Emma was out of earshot, Susan lowered her voice. Your father wasn't well at the end, Rhonda. And I don't just mean the cancer. His mind. He was seeing things, people who weren't there. He mentioned that in his journal. Rhonda led Susan to the parlor, where they sat on the sheet-draped sofa. He thought he was seeing my mother and Danny, not just them. Susan removed her glasses and wiped them on the edge of her slicker. He saw you too, a young version of you, and he talked about the quarry constantly, saying it was hungry, that it had been making bargains with the town for generations. Bargains? Crazy talk. Susan replaced her glasses. About sacrifices made to keep the town prosperous. About something living in the water that demanded payment every generation. He said that's why Danny drowned, as payment for your grandfather's debt. A chill ran through Rhonda. That's insane. Of course it is. Susan's eyes darted around the room, as if checking for eavesdroppers. But the thing is, Rhonda, your father wasn't the only one. There have been other incidents. Other people in town seeing things that can't be explained. Always connected to the quarry somehow. What kind of incidents? Susan leaned closer. 3 years ago, Tim Walker's boy went missing. They found his clothes by the quarry, but never found his body. Then Tim started seeing him around the house, hearing his voice. Tim killed himself 6 months later, left a note saying he couldn't take the visitations anymore. That's terrible, but last year, Martha Jenkins' daughter drowned in her bathtub. She was 27, Rhonda. Who drowns in a bathtub at 27? The water wasn't even deep enough to cover her face, but her lungs were full of water. And Martha swears it wasn't regular water, it was quarry water. She could tell by the smell, she said. Rhonda thought of the puddle on the dining room table, the scent of earth and decay. Why are you telling me this, Susan? Because your father made me promise to warn you if you ever came back. Susan gripped Rhonda's wrist with surprising strength. He said the quarry would call to you, try to finish what it started with Danny. He said you needed to leave Millfield and never return. Mrs. Cranmer? Emma stood in the doorway holding a steaming mug. I made tea. Susan released Rhonda's wrist and forced a smile. Thank you, dear. The rest of Susan's visit passed in strained small talk. She praised Emma's maturity, asked about their lives in New York, and carefully avoided any mention of the quarry or Rhonda's father's delusions. As she was leaving, she pressed a slip of paper into Rhonda's hand. My number, she said quietly. Call me if anything unusual happens, day or night. After Susan left, Rhonda tried calling Mr. Herschel's office, but got only an automated message saying the office was closed due to inclement weather. They would have to wait until tomorrow for news about the will and the house. The storm intensified as evening approached. Wind howled around the eaves, and rain lashed against the windows with such force that Rhonda feared the glass might shatter. The electricity flickered more frequently now, plunging the house into momentary darkness before humming back to life. I don't like this place, Emma said over their dinner of Susan's casserole. It feels wrong, like something bad happened here. Something did happen here, Rhonda admitted. My brother drowned in the quarry when I was about your age. Tore the family apart. That's why I left and never came back. I'm sorry. Emma pushed her food around her plate. Is that why we never talked about Grandpa? Partly, Rhonda sighed. We had a complicated relationship. He changed after Danny died, became distant, obsessed with the quarry. I think he blamed himself somehow. Thunder crashed overhead, and the lights went out, this time for good. They finished their meal by the light of candles Rhonda found in a kitchen drawer, their faces ghostly in the wavering glow. After dinner, they retreated to Emma's room, neither wanting to be alone in the darkened house. Rhonda read aloud from a dog-eared paperback she'd found on the bookshelf, while Emma sketched in her drawing pad. Mom, Emma said suddenly, did you notice how much Mrs. Cranmer looked like me? Rhonda looked up from the book. What do you mean? She had the same eyes as me, the same shaped face. Emma pointed to her sketch, a remarkably accurate portrait of Susan Cranmer. I've been trying to figure out who she reminds me of, and it's me, or what I might look like when I'm older. Rhonda studied the sketch. It was true. There was an unsettling resemblance between Susan and Emma, one she hadn't noticed during the visit. The same wide-set eyes, the same slightly pointed chin. Even the way Susan's hair curled when wet had reminded Rhonda of Emma's unruly locks. That's strange, she said, trying to keep her voice light. Maybe you're distantly related. Small towns, you know, everyone's connected somehow. But she knew it was more than that. Susan Cranmer had been homely in high school, nothing like the striking young woman her daughter was becoming. Yet the Susan who had visited today bore an unmistakable resemblance to Emma, as if she had been molded to look that way, shaped by something that had plucked the image from Rhonda's mind or Emma's. I think we should leave tomorrow, Rhonda said, closing the book. As soon as we meet with Mr. Herschel, we can come back later to deal with the house and Dad's things. Relief flashed across Emma's face. Really? We can go home? Really? Rhonda forced a smile. This was a mistake. I'm not ready to deal with all this yet. They prepared for bed, taking turns in the bathroom while the other held a candle. The storm continued unabated, wind moaning through the trees outside like a living thing in pain. Rhonda insisted they sleep in the same room. She made a pallet on the floor beside Emma's bed, armed with a flashlight and her cell phone, though the latter showed no signal bars in the storm. Try to get some sleep, she told Emma. Things will look better in the morning. But sleep proved elusive. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind set Rhonda's nerves on edge. She kept thinking about her father's journal, about Susan's warnings, about the photographs of men performing some ritual at the quarry's edge. A bargain struck long ago. A life for a life. She must have dozed eventually, because she awoke with a start, disoriented in the darkness. The storm had quieted somewhat, the rain now a gentle patter against the windows rather than a furious assault. Something had woken her, a sound from downstairs. Voices again, but different this time. Not her family, but children's voices, laughing and splashing. And the smell, earth and decay, stronger now, filling the room. Rhonda sat up, reaching for the flashlight. Emma, no response from the bed above her. She swept the beam across the mattress. Empty. Emma! She leapt to her feet, panic clawing at her throat. The bedroom door stood open, though she distinctly remembered closing it before they went to bed. In the hallway, water pooled on the hardwood floor. Not rain from a leaking roof, but quarry water, silty and smelling of algae and rotting leaves. It formed a trail leading to the stairs. Rhonda followed, her heart hammering. At the bottom of the staircase, the trail continued toward the back of the house, toward the kitchen and the back door beyond. The door stood wide open, rain and wind gusting in. Footprints, small, child-sized footprints, led out into the night. Emma! Rhonda screamed, running into the yard. The rain had slackened to a drizzle, and a quarter moon occasionally peeked through breaks in the clouds, providing just enough light to see by. The footprints continued across the yard, through a break in the picket fence, and into the woods beyond. Rhonda followed, heedless of the branches that tore at her nightgown, the stones that cut her bare feet. All that mattered was finding Emma. She knew where the trail was leading even before the trees thinned and the quarry came into view, its surface black and glassy in the fitful moonlight. And there, standing at the edge of the water, was Emma, or something wearing Emma's form. Because the figure that turned at Rhonda's approach wasn't quite right. Its proportions were slightly off, its movements too fluid, as if its bones were malleable. Emma, Rhonda approached slowly, her voice breaking. The thing that looked like her daughter smiled, but the expression didn't reach its eyes. The water is calling, Mom. Can't you hear it? Its voice was Emma's, but distorted, as if speaking underwater. Behind it, the quarry's surface began to ripple, though there was no wind. That's not Emma. That's not my daughter. Rhonda's voice emerged stronger than she expected. Where is she? What have you done with her? The creature's smile widened, stretching beyond the natural limits of a human face. She's where you should have been all those years ago, where your brother went. A life for a life, Rhonda Bishop. That was the bargain. What bargain? I never made any bargain. Not you. The thing's form shimmered, melting and reshaping until it wore the face of Rhonda's father. Him, and his father before him, and all the men who cut into the earth and disturbed what slept beneath. They promised regular tribute in exchange for prosperity, one life from each generation of founding families. Your brother was payment for your grandfather's debt, but you were meant to follow. That's insane. Rhonda edged closer, searching for any sign of the real Emma. My brother drowned in an accident. I was just a child watching from the shore. You were chosen, the thing said, now wearing her father's face perfectly, his voice a precise mimicry. But you got away. The quarry has been patient, waiting for your return. And now it has a replacement, another generation. A fair exchange. The water behind the creature began to churn, a whirlpool forming in the center of the quarry. From its depths rose a pale hand, the same child's hand from Rhonda's dream, reaching toward the sky. No! Rhonda lunged forward, trying to push past the thing wearing her father's face. Emma! The creature caught her arm, its grip inhumanly strong. Too late, Rhonda. The bargain is being fulfilled. More hands emerged from the whirlpool, dozens of them, pale and grasping. Among them, Rhonda spotted a familiar silver bracelet on one slender wrist, the charm bracelet she'd given Emma for her 13th birthday. Emma! She screamed again, fighting against the creature's hold. Emma, I'm coming. The thing chuckled, the sound bubbling like water through its lips. You can join her if you wish. The quarry always welcomes more. It grows stronger with each soul it claims. From somewhere deep in the woods behind them came a shout and the beam of a flashlight cutting through the darkness. Rhonda? Emma? Susan Cranmer emerged from the trees, her yellow slicker gleaming in the moonlight. She held something in her hands, a book bound in what looked like stone rather than leather, its pages glowing with faint blue light. The creature hissed at the sight of her, its form wavering between Calvin Bishop and something less human, something with too many angles and not enough substance. "Let her go." Susan's voice rang with authority. "The bargain is void." Calvin ended it with his sacrifice. The creature snarled, its features rippling like disturbed water. "The bargain cannot be broken. The hollow demands payment." "Not anymore." Susan opened the stone book, its pages casting eerie blue light across her face. Calvin Bishop gave his life willingly, knowing what it meant. A willing sacrifice ends the cycle. "The cancer," Rhonda whispered, understanding dawning. "He didn't die of cancer?" Susan shook her head, her eyes never leaving the creature. "There was cancer, yes, but it wasn't what killed him. He came to me 3 months ago with this book, the original covenant made between the town founders and what lives beneath the quarry. He found a loophole, a willing sacrifice from a founding family, given with full knowledge, could end the bargain permanently." The creature's grip on Rhonda's arm tightened painfully. "Lies. The hollow is eternal. The bargain is binding until the last stone of Millfield crumbles to dust. Read it yourself." Susan held the book higher, its pages now blazing with blue fire that cast no heat. "By my blood freely given, I break the chain that binds my lineage to the hollow." The whirlpool in the quarry intensified, water spiraling with such force that it created a funnel extending deep into the earth. The hands that had emerged began to sink back into the vortex. All except one, the one with Emma's silver bracelet, which continued to reach desperately upward. Rhonda broke free from the creature's grasp and lunged toward the water's edge. Without hesitation, she dove into the quarry, the cold shocking her system as she plunged beneath the surface. Underwater, the world transformed. The quarry was not a quarry but a vast cathedral of stone, its walls carved with symbols that glowed with the same blue light as Susan's book. And floating in the center of this cathedral, suspended in a bubble of air, was Emma. Unconscious but alive, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Around her swirled dozens of ghostly forms, men, women, and children from across the centuries, their faces twisted in eternal screams. Among them, Rhonda recognized her brother Danny, forever 16, his eyes wide with terror. And beneath them all, at the very bottom of the quarry, something vast and ancient stirred. A darkness that had no definite shape but constantly shifted, like smoke underwater. Eyes opened within the darkness, hundreds of them, glowing a sickly yellow-green. "Mine," a voice rumbled in Rhonda's mind. "All mine by right of bargain. You cannot take what has been freely given." Rhonda swam toward Emma, her lungs burning for air. The ghostly forms parted before her, some reaching out as if in supplication, others shrinking away in fear. "Your father's sacrifice bought nothing," the voice continued. "The hollow must be fed. It has always been fed." As Rhonda reached Emma's bubble, the darkness surged upward, tendrils of midnight wrapping around her ankles, pulling her down toward the waiting eyes. "Mom!" Emma's eyes fluttered open. "What's happening? Where are we?" "It's okay, baby." Rhonda stretched her hand toward her daughter, their fingertips almost touching. "I'm here. I've got you." The darkness pulled harder, dragging Rhonda deeper. Her vision began to dim as her oxygen-starved brain approached its limit. In her last moments of consciousness, she saw Susan's face appear at the quarry's edge, the stone book held aloft, its pages now a supernova of blue light that pierced even the murky depths. "By blood freely given." Susan's voice somehow carried underwater, vibrating through Rhonda's bones. "By blood freely given," the darkness shrieked. A sound that existed not in air but in the mind, a psychic wail of rage and hunger denied. Its grip on Rhonda's ankles loosened. With her last ounce of strength, Rhonda pushed upward, breaking through Emma's bubble and grabbing her daughter around the waist. Together they shot toward the surface, propelled not by Rhonda's failing strength but by some force from below, as if the trapped souls themselves were pushing them upward toward freedom. They broke the surface with a splash, gasping for air. The whirlpool had vanished, the quarry's surface once again a perfect mirror reflecting the night sky. Susan knelt at the edge, reaching out to help them to shore. "Quickly," she urged. "It's not over yet." As if in response to her words, the ground began to shake. Trees swayed and pebbles danced on the quarry's edge. The water level dropped suddenly, exposing stone walls that hadn't seen air in generations. "Run!" Susan pulled them to their feet. "Back to the house. Now!" They raced through the woods, the earth buckling beneath their feet. Behind them, a roar that was partly water, partly something far less natural, echoed through the night. Rhonda glanced back to see the quarry collapsing in on itself, water and stone swallowed by a vast sinkhole that grew with each passing second. They reached the house just as the tremors began to subside. From the back porch, they watched as dust rose from where the quarry had been, illuminated by the first pale light of dawn breaking in the east. "Is it over?" Emma asked, shivering in her wet nightgown. Susan closed the stone book, its pages now dark and ordinary. "Yes, the hollow has collapsed. The bargain is broken." "What was that thing?" Rhonda wrapped an arm around Emma's shoulders. "What's been living under our town all these years?" "Something old," Susan said. "Something that was here long before the first settlers arrived. The founding families discovered it when they began quarrying stone. Instead of fleeing, they made a deal, prosperity for the town in exchange for regular tribute. One life from each generation of each founding family. And my father found a way to end it." Rhonda's voice caught. "He sacrificed himself." Susan nodded. "He spent his final years researching, translating this book." She held up the stone tome. "The bargain had a termination clause. A willing sacrifice made with full knowledge of the consequences would end the cycle forever. He chose to die on his own terms, to protect you and Emma. But why did he never tell me? Would you have believed him?" Susan's gaze was sympathetic but direct. "After all these years of estrangement, he tried to warn you, but you weren't ready to listen. So he put his faith in me, and in this." She patted the book. "Those photographs in the album," Rhonda said slowly. "The ceremony by the quarry, that was part of the bargain? A renewal ceremony. Every 50 years, the town elders would recommit to the pact." Susan's expression darkened. Most people in Millfield never knew what was happening. They just accepted the occasional tragic accident as bad luck. "And Danny? My brother. He was chosen. Your grandfather's payment." Susan sighed. "Your father tried to prevent it, but the quarry always claimed its due. When you were marked as the next sacrifice but escaped, the bargain was left unfulfilled. The quarry has been waiting for you to return ever since." "And now," Emma asked, "is Millfield safe?" Susan looked back toward where the quarry had been. "The town will survive, but it won't thrive as it once did. The unnatural prosperity is gone, but so is the evil that demanded payment." They stood in silence as the sun rose fully, casting long shadows across the yard. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean world of vivid colors and sharp edges. "What now?" Rhonda asked finally. "Now you bury your father and honor his sacrifice." Susan placed the stone book in Rhonda's hands. "And perhaps you make peace with Millfield. It's your home, after all, despite everything that happened here." Rhonda looked down at the book, then up at the house where she'd grown up, the house her father had left to Emma. The weight of generations of secrets pressed down on her, but also the knowledge that the cycle had been broken. Whatever darkness had dwelled beneath Millfield was gone. "Maybe," she said, "maybe it's time to come home." Part 3. What remains? The quarry's collapse made national news. Geologists descended on Millfield, puzzling over the sudden sinkhole that had swallowed a local landmark. They spoke of underwater caves, destabilized by years of mining and recent heavy rains. A natural phenomenon, they declared, unusual but explainable. Rhonda knew better. In the weeks that followed, she and Emma settled into a strange new routine. Mr. Herschel finally made his appearance, confirming that Calvin Bishop had indeed left everything to his granddaughter. the house, a modest savings account, and several parcels of land around town, including the worthless crater that had once been the quarry. He was quite specific about the inheritance passing directly to Emma, the elderly lawyer explained, peering at Rhonda over half-moon glasses. Though you'll be the executor until she reaches 18, of course. Did he say why? Rhonda asked. Herschel shrugged. Calvin was a private man, especially in his final years. But he did leave this for you. He handed her an envelope with her name written in her father's distinctive handwriting. She waited until she was alone to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the message brief. Rhonda, if you're reading this, then I've succeeded and the hollow is sealed. The book will tell you everything you need to know. Trust Susan. She understands what's at stake. I know I wasn't the father you deserved. After Danny was taken, I was too consumed by guilt and fear to be what you needed. I drove you away, and that may have saved your life. For that, at least, I am grateful. The house belongs to Emma now. A new generation, unburdened by the bargain. Perhaps she can make it a home again. I loved you always, even when I couldn't show it. Dad. Rhonda folded the letter carefully and placed it in the stone book, which she kept locked in her father's desk drawer. She hadn't opened it since the night at the quarry, unsure if she was ready to know the full truth of Millfield's dark history. Meanwhile, life went on. The house needed extensive repairs. The roof leaked in 3 places, the plumbing was ancient, and the electrical system required a complete overhaul. Rhonda threw herself into the work, hiring local contractors and supervising the renovations personally. Emma enrolled in Millfield Middle School, the same school Rhonda had attended at her age. To Rhonda's surprise, her daughter adapted quickly, making friends and joining the art club. The Emma who had been reluctant to leave New York now seemed content in small-town life, fascinated by the history and quirks of Millfield. Susan Cranmer became a regular visitor, bringing casseroles and local gossip. She never mentioned the night at the quarry unless Rhonda brought it up first, which she rarely did. Some wounds were still too fresh, some questions too daunting. But the nightmares continued. In sleep, Rhonda returned to the underwater cathedral, floating among the trapped souls. Sometimes Danny swam up to her, his teenage face mournful, his mouth moving in words she couldn't hear. Sometimes she saw her father, not as the sick old man he'd become but as the strong, vital figure of her childhood, standing at the center of the ghostly congregation like a preacher at his pulpit. And always, lurking at the edges of these dreams, were the yellow-green eyes of the thing from the hollow, watching, waiting, patient beyond human understanding. She awoke from one such dream on a crisp November morning, gasping and disoriented. Sunlight streamed through her bedroom window, the sky a perfect cloudless blue. Outside, frost glittered on the lawn, the first serious cold snap of the season. Emma was already up, judging by the sounds of movement downstairs. Rhonda pulled on a robe and followed the noise to the kitchen, where she found her daughter making pancakes, a skill she'd recently acquired from Susan. "Morning, Mom." Emma flipped a pancake with surprising dexterity. "I thought you might want breakfast before we head out to the ceremony." The ceremony. Rhonda had almost forgotten. Today marked 1 month since the quarry's collapse, and Mayor Holcomb's son had organized a memorial service for those lost over the years. The sinkhole was being converted into a park, with a monument to honor the victims of tragic accidents at the quarry. If only they knew the truth. "What time is the ceremony again?" Rhonda asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the pot Emma had brewed. 11. Emma slid a stack of pancakes onto a plate and passed it to her mother. "Susan's picking us up at 10:30. They ate in companionable silence, the kitchen warm and bright. Renovations had started here first, replacing the ancient appliances and cracked linoleum with modern conveniences and warm ceramic tile. The dining room was next on the list, with its too large table and haunted memories. After breakfast, Rhonda dressed in a simple black dress appropriate for a memorial service. As she applied minimal makeup, she studied her reflection in the bathroom mirror. A month in Millfield had changed her. Not just the subtle lines of strain around her eyes or the few extra pounds from Susan's constant casseroles, but something deeper, a shift in her very essence. She belonged here now, connected to this place by blood and sacrifice and the breaking of an ancient bargain. The hollow might be gone, but its echoes remained, woven into the fabric of the town and its people. Susan arrived precisely at 10:30, dressed in a navy pantsuit with a string of pearls. "Ready, ladies? It's going to be quite a turnout. People are coming from 3 counties over." The drive to the former quarry site took less than 10 minutes. As they crested Hammond Hill, Rhonda could see the crater below, now partially filled with topsoil and ringed with newly planted saplings. A white tent had been erected near the edge, rows of folding chairs arranged beneath it. "They're calling it Remembrance Park," Susan said as they parked. "Calvin would have appreciated that, I think." The ceremony was brief but moving. Mayor Holcomb spoke of the quarry's importance to Millfield's history, of the generations of men who had carved their livelihood from its depths. He acknowledged the tragedies that had occurred there over the years, drownings, falls, disappearances, without ever hinting at the true cause. Other speakers followed, sharing personal memories of loved ones lost to the quarry's waters. When Danny's name was mentioned, Rhonda felt Emma's hand slip into hers, a silent gesture of support. After the formal speeches, people mingled beneath the tent, sharing coffee and memories. Rhonda found herself approached by elderly residents who remembered her as a child, who expressed condolences for her father's passing and welcome at her return. "Always knew you'd come back," old Mrs. Finch said, patting Rhonda's hand. "Bishop blood runs deep. Can't stay away forever." Rhonda smiled politely, but the phrase sent a shiver through her. Bishop blood runs deep. The same blood that had sealed the bargain. The same blood that had broken it. She excused herself and walked to the edge of the crater, looking down at what had once been the quarry. Workers had already begun transforming it, creating terraced gardens that would eventually descend to a central plaza with the memorial statue. In spring, it would be planted with wildflowers and ornamental trees, a place of beauty rising from decades of hidden horror. "It's really gone, isn't it?" Emma appeared beside her, her expression solemn beyond her years. "Yes," Rhonda said, "thanks to your grandfather. And you." Emma leaned against her mother's side. "Susan told me what you did, how you jumped into the quarry to save me. That was brave. Not brave, desperate." Rhonda put an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "I couldn't lose you." They stood in silence, watching as a crew of workers positioned a large boulder that would serve as the base for the memorial plaque. The stone had been quarried decades ago, one of the last pieces extracted before operations ceased. Its surface gleamed in the autumn sunlight, veined with threads of quartz that sparkled like embedded stars. "Do you think we'll ever know exactly what it was?" Emma asked. "The thing in the hollow?" Rhonda thought of the stone book locked in her father's desk, its pages filled with accounts dating back to the town's founding. The descriptions of the entity that lived beneath the quarry, the complex terms of the bargain, the generations of sacrifice. "Some questions don't have easy answers," she said finally, "and some answers are better left undiscovered." As they turned to go, Rhonda glanced back at the boulder one last time. For an instant, so briefly she might have imagined it, she thought she saw something move beneath its polished surface. A shimmer of yellow-green, like eyes opening and closing. Then it was gone, leaving only stone, silent and unyielding in the November sun. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Rhonda sat in her father's study with the stone book open before her. She had finally worked up the courage to read it properly, to understand the full history of what had happened in Millfield. The book dated back to 1842, when the first stone was cut from what would become the quarry. The workers had breached something ancient, something that had slumbered beneath the earth for countless millennia. It had no name in any human language, but the town's founders had called it the Hollow, not because it was empty, but because it created emptiness, a void that could never be filled. The bargain had been simple: prosperity for the town in exchange for regular tribute. One life from each generation of each founding family, freely given or taken by force. The Hollow would choose its sacrifices, marking them with a sign only the elders could recognize. Danny had been marked from birth, a small, crescent-shaped birthmark behind his left ear that Rhonda had always thought looked like a tiny moon. She touched the spot behind her own ear unconsciously, wondering if she bore a similar mark, invisible to her but clear to those who knew what to look for. The final pages of the book contained her father's handwriting, detailing his discovery of the termination clause and his plan to end the cycle once and for all. A willing sacrifice made with full knowledge breaks the chain for all generations to come. My life for theirs, a fair exchange. Rhonda closed the book, her eyes burning with unshed tears. All those years of estrangement, of thinking her father cold and distant, when he had been working to save her all along. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside the study. Rhonda looked up, expecting to see Emma, perhaps awakened by a bad dream. Instead, a puddle of water seeped beneath the door, spreading across the hardwood floor toward the desk where she sat. It carried the unmistakable scent of the quarry, earth and decay, now tinged with something else, something burning. Rhonda rose to her feet, the stone book clutched to her chest. "You're gone," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The bargain is broken. The hollow is sealed." The puddle stopped its advance, then began to coalesce, rising from the floor like mercury, forming a vaguely humanoid shape that shimmered in the dim light of the desk lamp. It had no features, just a suggestion of a head atop a fluid torso. "Gone," a voice whispered in her mind, the same voice she had heard beneath the quarry. "Never gone. Changed. Waiting. What do you want?" Rhonda demanded. "Haven't you taken enough from my family?" The shape rippled, almost as if shrugging. "Balance. Always balance. Your father broke the old bargain. A new one must be struck." "No. No more bargains." Rhonda opened the stone book, holding it up like a shield. "My father's sacrifice ended this. The hollow is sealed." The hollow, yes. The watery form drifted closer. "But I am not the hollow. I am what remains when bargains are broken, when balance is disturbed." Rhonda backed away until she hit the wall. "There is no balance to be restored. The debt is paid. Leave my family alone." The shape paused, then slowly began to dissolve, water running back toward the door. But as it retreated, the voice spoke one final time in Rhonda's mind. "All bargains have a cost, Rhonda Bishop. Your father knew this. Soon you will too. The hollow may be sealed, but other doors have opened. I'll be waiting when you find them." The water vanished, leaving only a damp spot on the floor that evaporated as Rhonda watched. No evidence that anything unnatural had occurred. She remained in the study until dawn, the stone book open on her lap, reading and rereading her father's final entries, searching for any mention of what remains when bargains are broken, any hint of doors that might have opened when the hollow was sealed. She found nothing. When sunrise finally painted the room in shades of gold, Rhonda closed the book and returned it to the desk drawer. Whatever had visited her in the night, whether a genuine remnant of the quarry's horror or a manifestation of her own guilt and fear, she would face it as her father had, with courage and determination. The bargain was broken. The hollow was sealed. If something else lurked in the spaces between, waiting to make new deals and demand new sacrifices, then she would confront it when the time came. For now, she had a house to restore, a daughter to raise, and a town to reclaim as her own. The Bishop blood might run deep, but it also ran strong. Strong enough to break ancient pacts. Strong enough to forge a new future from the ruins of the past. Rhonda Bishop left the study and went to wake her daughter for breakfast. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering Millfield in a blanket of pristine white, erasing the old to make way for the new, burying secrets beneath layers of cold beauty. But deep beneath the earth, in the remnants of the hollow, something stirred. Yellow-green eyes opened in the darkness, waiting, patient beyond human understanding, certain that sooner or later all bargains come full circle, and new doors are waiting to be opened. The end. Feeding time. 1. Ben Taggart's phone buzzed against the cheap particle board nightstand in his motel room. The vibration scraped through his hangover like a rusty blade. He fumbled for it, knocking over an empty mini bottle of Jack. The glaring screen showed Sheriff Dorsey and the time, 7:18 a.m. Taggart! he croaked, his voice like sandpaper. Got a situation. Need you at the borough's property. Now. Sheriff Dorsey's voice was tense, clipped. What kind of situation? Ben asked, sitting up and immediately regretting it as his head throbbed violently. The kind where I need my detective. The kind where you better not smell like a distillery when you get here. The line went dead. Ben stood under a lukewarm shower for 5 minutes, choking down 2 aspirin with tap water that tasted vaguely of iron. He studied his face in the mirror. Pallid skin, dark circles under bloodshot eyes, the beginnings of a beard he hadn't intended to grow. Not the face of a decorated Boston homicide detective, just the face of a man running from ghosts. Kings Hollow, Maine was supposed to be a fresh start. Population 1,400, a place where the worst crime was teenage vandalism or petty theft. The job offer had come at the perfect time, after the Boston Globe headlines had faded, but before the department's internal investigation concluded. 15 minutes later, Ben was following GPS directions down a dirt road that wound through dense pine forest, the morning fog still clinging to the trees. Late April in northern Maine still felt like winter, the air sharp with cold that cut through his jacket. As the road curved, the trees parted to reveal a clearing with a large farmhouse. Several police cruisers and an ambulance were parked in the gravel drive, their lights pulsing silently in the fog. Sheriff Dorsey stood talking to a uniformed officer, his breath visible in the cold air. He was a big man, late 50s, with the leathery complexion of someone who spent too much time outdoors. "Morning sunshine," Dorsey said as Ben approached. "You look like warmed over death." "Thanks. What happened?" Ben pulled his coat tighter around himself. Dorsey's expression sobered. "Martha Burrows, 82, lived alone since her husband passed 3 years back. Neighbor found her when she didn't answer her phone this morning. Natural causes?" The sheriff's eyes met Ben's. "Nothing natural about it." Ben followed Dorsey up creaking wooden porch steps and through the front door. The house smelled of old wood, dust, and something else. Something meaty and wrong. Dorsey led him through a neat living room, past walls lined with faded photographs. Martha was well loved around here. Church volunteer, former schoolteacher. Had 2 kids, both moved away years ago. We called them. They're driving up from Boston. Ben's stomach clenched at the word Boston. They reached a kitchen doorway where a young officer stood, looking pale. "Brace yourself," Dorsey warned. The kitchen was neat, with checkered curtains and blue-painted cabinets. An ancient refrigerator hummed in the corner. And in the center of the room, Martha Burrows, or what remained of her, sat at her kitchen table. The body was intact, upright in a wooden chair. But the woman's face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, eyes wide and mouth gaping in a silent scream. Her skin was gray, desiccated, like a mummy's. Every drop of moisture seemed to have been extracted from her body. Ben had seen a lot in 15 years of police work, but nothing like this. "Jesus," he whispered. "That's not the worst of it," Dorsey said, pointing to the floor. A trail of something dark led from the chair to the basement door. Not blood, it was too thick, almost like tar. Whatever had left it had come from the basement and returned there. "What the hell is that?" Ben asked. "No idea, and I'm not sure I want to know." Dorsey looked shaken. "There's more down there." The door was open when we arrived. Ben moved closer to the body, careful not to disturb anything. Martha's hands were clutched around a small wooden cross, her knuckles bleached white. Despite her horrific appearance, there wasn't a drop of blood anywhere. It was as if she'd been freeze-dried from the inside out. "We need the state forensic team," Ben said. "Already called. They're 3 hours out minimum." Dorsey shifted uncomfortably. "I thought you'd want to take lead since you've got the homicide experience. This is the first murder we've had in Kings Hollow in 12 years. You're sure it's murder?" Dorsey gestured at the body. "You think that's natural causes? Heart attack? Stroke?" Ben had to concede the point. "Any signs of forced entry?" "None. Door was locked from the inside when the neighbor came by. She has a key." "Who found her?" "Ellie Connors. Lives about a quarter mile down the road." Comes by every morning to have coffee with Martha. Ben nodded, still studying the body. Something caught his eye, a small book clutched in Martha's other hand, partially hidden by the folds of her housecoat. He slipped on latex gloves and carefully extracted it. It was an old diary, its leather cover cracked with age. A single word was written in faded ink on the first page: feeding. The rest of the pages were blank except for the last one, which contained a single line in shaky handwriting. It's awake again. 2. The basement was cold and smelled of wet earth. Ben's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing stone walls slick with moisture and a dirt floor. The black, tar-like substance formed a clear trail across the floor, leading to the far corner of the room. "Watch your step," Ben said to Dorsey, who followed close behind. The beam caught something etched into the stone wall. Ben moved closer. It was a symbol, a circle containing a 5-pointed star with strange markings along each point. "A pentagram?" Dorsey asked, his voice tight. "Something like that, but I've never seen these markings before." The black trail led directly to the symbol, then simply ended. Ben crouched, examining the substance. It had the consistency of molasses but seemed dry to the touch. When he shined his light directly on it, the beam didn't reflect as expected. It seemed to be absorbed, making the substance appear even darker. "Don't touch that," Dorsey warned. "I wasn't planning to," Ben replied, standing up. His headache was returning with a vengeance. "What's behind this wall?" "Nothing, just earth. This house dates back to the 1800s. Ben ran his fingers along the edges of the stone blocks. One felt slightly loose. He pushed, and the stone moved inward with a grinding sound. Cool air rushed out from the gap, carrying a smell like rotting vegetation. "Jesus, Taggart, what are you doing?" Dorsey backed away. Ben ignored him, pushing the stone further until it fell inward with a dull thud. The opening revealed a narrow tunnel, roughly hewn from the earth, disappearing into darkness. "Get the crime scene techs to photograph everything before we go any further," Ben said. "Then I want to talk to the neighbor who found her." Outside, the fog had lifted, revealing a crisp spring morning. Ben took deep breaths of the clean air, trying to clear his head. Ellie Connors sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket provided by one of the paramedics. She was in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and clear blue eyes currently red from crying. "Mrs. Connors," Ben said gently, sitting beside her. "I'm Detective Taggart. I'm very sorry about your friend." The woman nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I just saw her yesterday. We played canasta. She seemed fine. A little worried, maybe, but fine." "Worried about what?" "She said she was hearing things in the night. Scratching sounds, coming from the basement." Mrs. Connors shook her head. "I told her it was probably raccoons. Old houses like this, they get all sorts of critters." "Did she mention anything else? Anything unusual happening recently?" Ellie hesitated. "Well, she did say something odd last week, about how it was that time again. I thought she meant spring cleaning or something." "Did she ever talk about a diary? Or mention something called feeding?" The older woman's face paled slightly. "The Burroughs diary? I thought that was just a story." Ben leaned forward. "What story?" "Just local folklore. The Burroughs family has lived on this land for generations. There's an old tale about how the first Burroughs made a deal with something to protect the family, but it required payment every 50 years. She shook her head. "It's just nonsense. Ghost stories to scare children." "What kind of payment?" Ben pressed. Ellie looked away. "The stories say it feeds on fear, that it takes those who are already afraid." She clutched the blanket tighter. "But it's just a story. Martha didn't believe in such things. She was a proper Christian woman." Ben thought of the cross clutched in Martha's withered hand. "Mrs. Connors, did Martha have any family heirlooms? Anything unusual passed down through generations?" "Cependant, il suppose. She always wore it. Said it was protection." Ellie frowned. "She wasn't wearing it this morning." "What did it look like?" "Silver with strange markings. similar to the Burrows family crest. She hesitated. "Detective, what happened to Martha? What did that to her?" Ben stood up, avoiding the question. "We're still investigating. Is there someone who can stay with you today? You shouldn't be alone." "My daughter's coming to get me." Ellie's eyes sharpened. "You think I'm in danger?" "It's just a precaution," Ben assured her, not believing his own words. As he turned to go, Ellie caught his sleeve. "Detective, the Burrows property. There are places here you shouldn't go. Places in the woods. The locals know to stay away." "Why?" "Because not everything that hungers can be satisfied." 3. By noon, the state forensics team had arrived and was processing the scene. Ben stood in Martha's kitchen, flipping through the case file of Daniel Burrows, Martha's husband who had died 3 years ago. "Heart attack," Ben muttered, reading the death certificate. "Nothing suspicious." Sheriff Dorsey entered, looking grim. "They're moving the body now. Forensics says they've never seen anything like it. It's as if every fluid was drained from her body. But there's no puncture wounds, no signs of trauma." Ben handed him the file. "What about her husband? Anything unusual about his death?" "Daniel? No. Standard heart attack. He was 87, had a history of heart problems." Dorsey shrugged. "Why?" "Just covering bases." Ben glanced toward the basement door. "What did they find down there?" "The tunnel goes about 30 feet before it collapses. They think it might be part of an old root cellar or storage area. Nothing unusual except for that symbol." Ben frowned. "I want to see the property records. How far does the Burrows land extend?" "About 50 acres, mostly forest now. Used to be farmland until the 1960s. Dorsey looked at him curiously. "You buying into those local legends? The Burrows curse?" "I'm not buying into anything yet. But when someone mentions a 50-year cycle and we find a mummified body with a tunnel under the house, I get curious." Back at the Kings Hollow Sheriff's Department, a modest building that housed 4 deputies, the sheriff, and now Ben. He spread out maps of the property on his desk. The department's only other detective, Linda Marquez, leaned against the doorframe, watching him. "Enjoying our little town's hospitality?" she asked, her tone slightly mocking. Linda was in her 40s, with dark hair streaked with gray and sharp eyes that didn't miss much. She'd made it clear from day one that she resented the outside hire. "It's been enlightening," Ben replied without looking up. "You know anything about the Burrows family?" Linda came into the room, studying the map. "Old money. Used to own half the county. Martha was the last one living here. The rest scattered years ago." "What about the legends? The curse?" She raised an eyebrow. "Sheriff's been talking, huh?" "It's just campfire stories. Parents used them to keep kids from wandering in the woods at night." "Humor me," Linda sighed, taking a seat. "Fine. Story goes that during a harsh winter in the 1870s, William Burrows was desperate to save his family from starvation. He wandered into the deepest part of the forest and made a deal with something that lived there. It would protect his family, ensure their prosperity, in exchange for tribute every 50 years. What kind of tribute? Depends on who's telling the story. Some say it was livestock. Others say it was people, strangers, travelers who wouldn't be missed. The most common version is that it feeds on fear itself." Linda shrugged. "Like I said, campfire stuff." Ben circled an area on the map. "What's here?" "In the center of the property. Just woods now. There used to be something there, a stone circle, I think. Kids used to dare each other to go there at night." She paused. "I went once when I was 16. Nothing happened." "Maybe it wasn't feeding time," Ben said quietly. Linda stood up. "Look, Taggart. I get that you're used to big city murders, conspiracies, whatever, but this is King's Hollow. Martha was killed by someone very human, for very human reasons. Maybe someone who knew she lived alone, had money saved up. You didn't see her body. I saw the photos, and yes, it's bizarre, but jumping to supernatural explanations is a waste of time." Ben nodded absently, still studying the map. "Maybe, but I'm going to check out those woods anyway." As Linda left, Ben's phone buzzed. It was a text from the medical examiner. Preliminary findings: complete dehydration of all tissues, no blood or other fluids present. Never seen anything like it. Full report tomorrow. Ben stared at the message, then at the map again. He circled the date on his desk calendar, April 24th. Then he opened his laptop and began searching through newspaper archives. 3 hours later, he had a pattern. April 1975. 3 hikers disappeared in the woods near Kings Hollow. Never found. April 1925. A family of 4 found dead in their farmhouse on what was then the edge of Burroughs' property. Cause of death listed as unknown. April 1875. William Burroughs reported 5 of his farmhands missing. Bodies never recovered. 50 years. Like clockwork. And the most recent before Martha. April 2025. Exactly 3 years ago. Daniel Burroughs. Heart attack. Nothing suspicious. Except it was exactly 3 years ago to the day. Ben grabbed his jacket. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He had maybe 2 hours of daylight left. He needed to see the woods for himself. For the forest was eerily quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just the sound of Ben's own breathing and the crunch of dead leaves under his boots. He followed an overgrown trail that, according to the map, led to the center of the Burroughs property. His flashlight was a reassuring weight in his jacket pocket, though he hoped to be out before dark. Some primal instinct told him he didn't want to be in these woods after sunset. The trees grew denser as he walked, old-growth pines and oaks blocking out more and more of the fading daylight. The air felt different here, heavier, charged with something he couldn't name. His phone buzzed. The screen showed Sheriff Dorsey. Ben hesitated, then declined the call. He didn't need the sheriff telling him to turn back. After 20 minutes of hiking, the trail opened into a small clearing. In the center stood what he'd been looking for. A circle of 7 stone pillars, each about 4 feet high, weathered by time and covered in patches of moss. The ground within the circle was bare earth, devoid of the grass and weeds that grew everywhere else. And etched into each stone pillar was the same symbol he'd seen in Martha's basement. Ben approached cautiously, his police instincts screaming warnings. Something about this place felt wrong, as if the clearing existed slightly out of sync with the world around it. The air was completely still, no breeze moving the branches of the surrounding trees. And despite the waning daylight, it seemed darker within the stone circle than outside it. He took photos with his phone, then knelt to examine the ground. The earth was oddly compact, almost like clay. When he pressed his palm against it, the dirt felt cold. Much colder than it should have been. A twig snapped somewhere behind him. Ben spun around, hand instinctively moving to his holstered gun. Nothing moved in the trees. The forest remained unnaturally silent. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement between 2 distant pines. A shadow that seemed to shift independently of the trees casting it. "Police!" Ben called out, drawing his weapon. "Identify yourself." His voice sounded muffled, as if the air itself was absorbing the sound. The shadow moved again, sliding between trees with a liquid grace that seemed wrong. Too fluid, too dark. The light was fading rapidly now, the sunset giving way to dusk. Ben's phone showed no signal bars. The shadow had disappeared, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He turned to leave the clearing and froze. The path he'd taken was gone. Where there had been a clear trail minutes before, there was now only unbroken forest, dense and impenetrable. "Shit!" he muttered, turning in a slow circle. Every direction looked the same, just endless trees growing darker by the second. Something moved in his peripheral vision. When he turned toward it, there was nothing there. But now something shifted on his other side. And again, and again. Shadows flitting between trees, always just out of direct sight. Ben's pulse quickened. He was a rational man, a detective who dealt in evidence and facts. But right now, rational thought was being drowned out by a more primitive instinct. Fear. He clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the growing darkness. The rational part of his mind said to pick a direction and walk straight. He'd eventually hit a road or the edge of the property. But his instinct kept him rooted in place. Because now the shadows were getting closer. They moved with purpose, circling the clearing like predators sizing up prey. Ben counted at least 5 distinct shapes, though it was hard to be sure. They seemed to blend together, separate, rejoin. The darkness between the trees was alive, watching him. "What do you want?" Ben called out, his voice steadier than he felt. A sound answered him, not quite a voice, but something trying to mimic one. A rasping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Feed." The words slithered through the air, raising goosebumps on Ben's arms. He raised his gun, though he had no idea what he would shoot at. "Feed Taim." The shadows drew closer, separating into distinct forms. They were vaguely humanoid but wrong, too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. And where faces should be, there was only darkness. Ben fired a warning shot into the air. The sound was swallowed by the forest, as if it had never happened. The shadows paused, then continued their approach. 50 years. The compact. Payment due. The voice was clearer now, though it still didn't seem to come from any specific direction. It resonated inside Ben's head, cold and ancient. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ben said, backing toward the stone circle. It seemed like the only place the shadows weren't approaching from. The burrow's blood, the oath, the fear. One of the shadows broke from the circle, moving with that unnatural fluidity toward Ben. He fired directly at it. The bullet passed through with no effect, as if he'd shot at smoke. Cold panic gripped him. Ben continued backing up until he felt one of the stone pillars against his back. The shadow was less than 10 feet away now. Up close, he could see that it wasn't truly a shadow at all, but something darker. A void in the shape of a person, absorbing what little light remained. The diary, Martha's words. "It's awake again." What had Ellie said? "Feeds on fear, takes those who are already afraid." Ben realized with sudden clarity what was happening. Whatever these things were, they were feeding on his fear, growing stronger, more solid with each spike of terror. He forced himself to breathe, to calm the racing of his heart, to push down the primal fear that screamed at him to run. The shadow hesitated. The burrow's blood offered payment. "Where is our due?" "I'm not a burrow's," Ben said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I don't owe you anything. Then you are food." The shadow lunged forward, impossibly fast. Ben felt ice-cold fingers grip his throat, cutting off his breath. The touch burned with cold, like dry ice against skin. Darkness closed in around his vision as the creature began to feed. He could feel something being drawn out of him, not blood, but something more essential. His fear, yes, but also memories, emotions, the very things that made him human. With his last conscious thought, Ben fumbled in his pocket, fingers closing around the silver pendant he'd found in Martha's bedroom drawer before leaving for the woods. The one Ellie had mentioned. He pulled it out, gasping as the shadow's grip tightened. The pendant glowed with a soft blue light the moment it touched the creature. There was a sound like 1,000 voices screaming at once, and suddenly Ben was free, collapsing to the ground, gasping for air. The shadows retreated, hissing like steam escaping a valve. The ward, the protection. How do you possess it? Ben held up the pendant, his hand shaking. It continued to emit that soft blue glow, keeping the shadows at bay. "The deal is off," he managed to say between ragged breaths. "Find another food source. The compact cannot be broken, only transferred. Someone must feed us." The shadows circled just beyond the pendant's light, restless and hungry. "If not you, then another. The fear must be paid." Ben staggered to his feet, still holding the pendant before him like a shield. The shadows parted, creating a path back to the now visible trail. "Go. But know this, the hunger remains. It will find sustenance. It always does." Ben didn't need to be told twice. He ran down the trail, the pendant clutched in his hand, not looking back until he reached his car. 5. The King's Hollow Sheriff's Department was quiet at 11 p.m. Ben sat at his desk, surrounded by open files and old newspaper clippings. His throat was bruised where the shadow thing had grabbed him, but otherwise, he was physically unharmed. Mentally was another story. He'd always prided himself on being rational, on finding logical explanations for seemingly inexplicable events. But there was no rational explanation for what had happened in those woods. Sheriff Dorsey entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one on Ben's desk. "You look like hell," he said, taking a seat opposite Ben. "Thanks." Ben took a sip of the coffee. It was terrible but hot. "Want to tell me why you went into those woods alone? After I specifically told everyone to stay away from the property until the investigation was complete." Ben hesitated. How could he explain what he'd seen? What would happen if he told the truth? "I was following a lead," he said finally. "A lead." Dorsey's tone was flat. "Based on local ghost stories. It's more than stories." Ben pushed forward the newspaper clippings. "Every 50 years, Dorsey, like clockwork, something happens on Burroughs' property. People die, or disappear." The sheriff glanced at the articles without touching them. "And what's your theory? That some kind of monster is killing people every half-century? That it got Martha?" "I don't know what it is," Ben admitted, "but I know what I saw." "And what exactly did you see?" Ben opened his mouth, closed it again. How could he describe the living shadows? The voice that wasn't a voice? The feeling of something feeding on his fear? Instead, he placed Martha's pendant on the desk between them. It looked ordinary now, just a silver disc with strange markings. Martha Burroughs knew something was coming for her. She tried to protect herself with this. Dorsey picked up the pendant, examining it. "And you think this, what? Wards off evil spirits? I think there's something in those woods. Something old. Something hungry." Ben leaned forward. "And I think the Burroughs family has been feeding it for generations." "Feeding it what? People? Fear." Ben touched his bruised throat. "It feeds on fear." Dorsey set the pendant down carefully. "Taggart, I brought you here because you're a good detective. Because this town needed someone with your experience. Not because I wanted you bringing your big city paranoia to my quiet community." "You saw Martha's body," Ben argued. "You know that wasn't natural." "No, it wasn't. It was murder. Bizarre, unexplainable murder. But murder committed by a human being, not some shadow monster from a campfire story." Dorsey stood up. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we follow real leads. Door to door. Phone records. Bank statements. Real police work." After Dorsey left, Ben sat staring at the pendant. It had saved his life in the woods. But why? What made it special? His phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "The pendant only works for Burroughs' blood." "How did you use it?" Ben stared at the message, a chill running down his spine. He typed back, "Who is this?" The response came almost immediately. "Someone who knows what hungers in the woods. Meet me at the Crossroads Diner. Midnight." Ben checked his watch. 11:40 p.m. He grabbed his jacket and the pendant, suddenly eager to be out of the empty station. The Crossroads Diner sat at the intersection of the 2 main highways outside of Kings Hollow. At midnight, it was nearly empty. Just a couple of truckers at the counter and a lone figure in a booth at the back. As Ben approached, he realized it was a young woman, maybe early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She watched him with sharp, assessing eyes. "Detective Taggart," she said as he slid into the booth opposite her. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," Ben replied. "Who are you?" "Rebecca Burroughs. Martha was my grandmother." Ben studied her. There was a resemblance, the same high cheekbones, the same watchful eyes. "You're supposed to be driving up from Boston." "I arrived this afternoon. Stayed away from the official circus." She nodded toward his throat. "They marked you." Ben's hand went to the bruising. "What do you know about what happened to your grandmother?" "The same thing that happens every 50 years. The feeding." Rebecca's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. "What I don't understand is how you survived. That pendant only works for Burroughs' blood." Ben placed the pendant on the table between them. Maybe it works for anyone. It doesn't. Trust me. Rebecca pushed up her sleeve, revealing a matching pendant tattooed on her inner wrist. Family tradition. Protection. Protection from what exactly? Rebecca sighed, looking suddenly tired. You've seen them. The hungry ones. That's what my grandmother called them. What are they? No one knows for sure. Some kind of ancient spirits. Parasites that feed on human emotion. Fear is what they prefer, but they'll take anything in a pinch. Grief, rage, despair. And your family has been feeding them for generations. Rebecca nodded. William Burroughs made the original deal. Protection and prosperity for the family, in exchange for feeding them every 50 years. Feeding them what? Who? It varies. Sometimes strangers. Sometimes family members who volunteer. She looked down at her coffee. My grandfather volunteered last time. His heart was failing anyway. He thought he could end it, satisfy them for another 50 years. But it didn't work, Ben said, remembering the dates. 3 years later, they came for Martha. The hunger is getting worse. The intervals are shorter. They're not honoring the original agreement anymore. Rebecca looked up at him. Which brings me back to my question. How did you use the pendant? Ben hesitated, then decided on the truth. I don't know. I found it in Martha's drawer. When the things attacked me in the woods, I pulled it out. It glowed. They backed off. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. It glowed? For you? Yes. Why? She reached across the table, taking his hand. Her touch was cool, clinical. She turned his palm upward, studying it with a frown. What's your connection to King's Hollow, Detective Taggart? Why are you really here? I took a job. That's all. No. Rebecca shook her head. No one ends up in King's Hollow by accident. Especially not now. Especially not someone who can use a Burroughs pendant. Ben pulled his hand away. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you might have Burroughs blood in you somewhere. It would explain how the pendant worked for you. It would explain why you're here at all. She leaned forward. The hungry ones are getting stronger. The protections are failing. We need to renew the compact or end it completely. End it how? I don't know yet, but I need your help. Rebecca's eyes bored into his. They've marked you now. They'll come for you again. And next time, they won't be deterred so easily. Ben thought of the shadows in the woods, the voice that seemed to echo inside his skull, the feeling of something essential being pulled out of him. Why should I trust you? Because I'm the only one who knows what we're dealing with. And because you've seen them now. You know this isn't just some local legend. Rebecca stood up. Meet me at my grandmother's house tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. I'll show you what she was working on before she died. As she turned to leave, Ben caught her arm. Wait, what if I am connected to your family somehow? What does that mean? Rebecca's expression softened slightly. It means you're part of this whether you want to be or not. It means they'll keep coming for you until they've fed. She gently removed his hand. And it means you might be our only chance to end this for good. After she left, Ben sat in the booth for a long time, staring at the pendant. He thought about Boston, about why he'd really come to King's Hollow, about running from his own fears. His phone buzzed with a text from Sheriff Dorsey. Another body found. Same condition as Martha. We need you at the station. Now, Ben looked out the diner window. The night was pitch black. No moon visible through the thick cloud cover. Somewhere in those woods, the shadows were feeding, and they were still hungry. 6. The second victim was Ellie Connors. She had been found in her bedroom, the same gray, desiccated appearance as Martha Burroughs, the same look of terror frozen on her face. Ben stood in her neat living room watching the forensics team work. Dawn was breaking outside, painting the sky a dull gray that matched his mood. No signs of forced entry, Sheriff Dorsey said, joining him. Door locked from inside. No footprints, no evidence of an intruder. Except for this, Ben said, pointing to the now familiar black, tar-like substance on the floor. It formed a trail from the bedroom to the front door, then disappeared. Could be the same killer, Dorsey admitted, using some kind of chemical to do that to them. Ben didn't argue. There was no point. Instead, he checked his watch. 6:30 a.m. He needed to meet Rebecca Burrows in 30 minutes. I need to follow up on something, he told Dorsey. I'll be at the Burrows property. What lead are you following? The granddaughter. She arrived in town yesterday. Dorsey frowned. The family was notified she wouldn't be arriving until this afternoon. Seems she came early, Ben said, already heading for the door. The morning was cold and damp, a light drizzle falling as Ben pulled up to the Burrows farmhouse. Rebecca's rental car was already in the driveway. The police tape across the front door had been removed. He found her in the basement, kneeling beside the opened wall where the tunnel had been discovered. She was placing small objects at intervals along the tunnel entrance. Candles, stones, what looked like bundles of dried herbs. What are you doing? Ben asked. Rebecca didn't look up. Reinforcing the barriers. They're getting desperate. Hungry. Another woman died last night. Ellie Connors. Now Rebecca did look up, her expression grim. Martha's friend. I was afraid of that. The hungry ones can follow connections, emotional ties between people. So anyone who was close to your grandmother is in danger? Potentially. That's why we need to act quickly. Rebecca stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. Come with me. I need to show you something. She led Ben up the basement stairs and through the kitchen, where the blood stain from Martha's body remained outlined in police chalk. Ben noticed that Rebecca avoided looking at it as they passed. They entered what must have been Martha's study, a small room lined with bookshelves and dominated by an antique oak desk. Rebecca went directly to one of the shelves and pulled out a large, leather-bound volume. This is the Burrows family history, she explained, placing it on the desk. The real history, not the sanitized version the town knows. She opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. The paper was yellowed with age, the handwriting precise but archaic. At the top of the page was the same symbol Ben had seen in the basement and the stone circle. William Burrows, 1875, Rebecca said, pointing to the signature at the bottom of the page. My great-great-great-grandfather. This is the original compact. Ben leaned closer, reading the faded text. I, William Burrows, of sound mind and desperate heart, do hereby enter into agreement with those who hunger beyond the veil. In exchange for the protection and prosperity of my bloodline, I offer sustenance at the appointed time, once every 50 years hence. The circle of stones shall serve as their gateway, the sigil as both lock and key. This I seal with my blood and bind to my line, that all who bear the name Burrows shall honor this compact until the sun burns cold and the stars fall from heaven. Below the text was a dark brown stain, blood, Ben realized. He made a deal with... What exactly? Rebecca turned the page, revealing detailed illustrations of the shadow creatures Ben had encountered in the woods. The drawings captured their wrongness, the impossible angles of their limbs, the void-like quality of their forms. The local Abenaki tribes called them Wendigo spirits, but they're older than any human name. They exist in the spaces between our world and somewhere else. They feed on emotion, primarily fear, drawing it out like marrow from bone. And your family has been, what? Sacrificing people to them? Rebecca's expression hardened. It wasn't meant to be like that. The original agreement was for animal sacrifice. But over time, they grew stronger, hungrier. Animals weren't enough. She flipped through the book, showing Ben entries from different eras. The pattern was clear: every 50 years, deaths associated with the Burrows property. My grandfather tried to end it, Rebecca continued. He'd been researching ways to break the compact. When he realized his heart was failing, he offered himself as the last sacrifice, hoping it would satisfy them for good. But it didn't work, Ben said. No, because the compact can only be broken by the one who made it, or by his direct blood descendant using the original method. Rebecca looked up at him. That's where you come in. Me? I told you, I have no connection to your family. Rebecca studied him for a moment, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small knife. Before Ben could react, she had pricked her own finger and held the bleeding digit over the pendant Ben had taken from Martha's room. The pendant glowed faintly, a soft bluish light. "Burrow's blood activates the protection," she said. Then she reached for Ben's hand. "May I?" Against his better judgment, Ben nodded. Rebecca pricked his finger and held it over the pendant. The same blue glow appeared, perhaps even brighter than before. "You see, there's a connection. Somewhere in your family tree, there's Burrow's blood." Ben stared at the glowing pendant, his mind racing. He'd been adopted as an infant, had never known his biological parents. Could there be a connection to this place, this family he'd never heard of until taking this job? "Even if that's true," he said, pulling his hand away, "what does it have to do with stopping these creatures?" "The compact draws power from blood connection. That's why they're drawn to those with Burrow's blood first." Rebecca turned to the final pages of the book, which contained handwritten notes in a more modern hand. "My grandmother found a ritual that might sever the connection permanently, but it requires Burrow's blood, specifically, blood from two different branches of the family. Like you and me. Yes, if you are indeed connected to the bloodline." Ben thought of the shadows in the woods, of Martha and Ellie's desiccated bodies, of the voice that had whispered in his mind, 50 years. The compact, payment due. What would we have to do? Rebecca pointed to the notes. "Return to the stone circle at midnight. Revoke the compact using the original words, but in reverse. Seal it with blood from both branches of the family." "That's it? Seems too simple." "It won't be simple," Rebecca said grimly. "They'll fight it. They'll try to stop us. They'll feed on our fear if they can." Ben rubbed his bruised throat, remembering the cold touch of the shadow creature. "And if we fail, then they take what they want. They feed until they're satisfied. And the cycle continues." Rebecca closed the book. "But they're breaking the original agreement already. The 50-year interval is shortening. Next time might be 20 years, then 10, until they're feeding constantly." Ben's phone buzzed with a text from Sheriff Dorsey. "Where are you? Third victim found. Dr. Mills. Same MO." Rebecca read the message over his shoulder. "It's escalating. They're following the connections. Martha to Ellie to her doctor. How do they choose the victims? Fear attracts them. Those who are already afraid are easier prey." She looked at him intently. "What were you afraid of, Detective Taggart, when you encountered them in the woods?" Ben thought back to that moment, the darkness closing in, the shadows circling. But his fear hadn't started there. It had been with him much longer. "Boston," he said quietly. "I was working a case. Serial killer targeting children. We caught him, but not before the last victim. A little girl. I was too late." The words came hard, dredging up memories he'd tried to bury. "The press blamed me. Internal affairs investigated. I was cleared, but the damage was done. I couldn't walk into a room without feeling the judgment. The whispers." Ben looked away. "So I ran. Took the first job that would have me, in a town I'd never heard of." "You were running from your fear," Rebecca said softly. "But it followed you here. That's why they found you in the woods. That's why the pendant worked for you. Your fear called to them, and your blood connected you to the compact." Ben wanted to argue, to deny the impossible connections she was drawing. But he couldn't, not after what he'd seen. "So tonight we end it," he said. "We go to the stone circle and break the compact." Rebecca nodded. "But we need to be prepared. They'll throw everything at us. Our deepest fears, our worst memories. We can't let them feed on that fear, or we'll end up like my grandmother." "How do we stop them from feeding?" "We don't feel fear," Rebecca said simply. "Or rather, we feel it but don't let it consume us. The pendant will help, but ultimately, it's about facing what frightens us most." Ben thought about the little girl in Boston, about the shadow creatures in the woods, about all the fears he'd been running from. "Midnight, then," he said. But first, I need to convince Dorsey to evacuate the area around the Burrows property. If this doesn't work, more people will die. Rebecca hesitated, then handed him the family book. Take this. Study the ritual. Understand what we're up against. I'll meet you at the edge of the woods at 11. As Ben left the house, the rain had stopped, but dark clouds still hung low over King's Hollow. He glanced back at the Burrows house, wondering how many secrets it still held, how many nightmares still lurked in its shadows, and whether by midnight those nightmares would be put to rest, or whether they would claim 2 more victims. 7. Sheriff Dorsey didn't believe him, of course, but the third death, Dr. Samuel Mills, found in his office with the same desiccated appearance, had rattled him enough that he agreed to evacuate the homes nearest to the Burrows property, under the pretext of a potential gas leak. This is temporary, Dorsey warned as they stood in the station parking lot. 24 hours. Then I want real answers, Taggart. You'll have them, Ben promised, hoping it was true. Back in his motel room, Ben spent the afternoon studying the Burrows family book. The history it contained was darker than Rebecca had suggested. Generations of mysterious deaths, sacrifices disguised as accidents, all to feed the hungry shadows and maintain the family's prosperity. And there was something else, something Rebecca hadn't mentioned. According to the book, William Burrows hadn't just stumbled upon the shadow creatures by accident. He had sought them out deliberately, using an ancient ritual he'd discovered in a text brought back from Europe. I called them forth, his journal entry read. I awakened them from their slumber beyond the veil, and in doing so, I have bound my blood to theirs until the end of time. Ben frowned, rereading the passage. This wasn't just about breaking a compact. It was about sending the creatures back to whatever realm they had come from. At 10:30 p.m., he drove to the edge of the Burrows property. The night was clear and cold, stars visible in the black sky above. No moon, which somehow seemed appropriate. Rebecca was waiting for him, dressed in dark clothes, a backpack slung over her shoulder. She had drawn the protective symbol on her forearms in what looked like black ink. I marked the trail, she said, handing him a flashlight. We need to follow the symbols to the stone circle. Ben showed her what he'd found in the book. Your ancestor didn't just make a deal with these things. He summoned them, woke them up. Rebecca nodded slowly. I suspected as much. The family stories always painted him as a savior, making a noble sacrifice for future generations. But men like that don't make deals. They create situations where deals are necessary. They set off into the woods, following small reflective markers Rebecca had placed on trees earlier. The forest was as unnaturally quiet as before, the darkness between the trees deeper than it should have been. They know we're coming, Rebecca said softly. They can sense us. Will the pendants protect us? To a point, but remember they feed on fear. Control yours, and they have nothing to consume. Easier said than done, Ben thought. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified in the stillness. His hand kept returning to his gun, though he knew it would be useless against these creatures. As they approached the stone circle, the air grew noticeably colder. Their breath fogged in front of them, though it was April and the day had been mild. There, Rebecca whispered, pointing ahead. The stone circle looked different in the darkness. The 7 pillars seemed taller, more imposing. The symbols etched into them glowed faintly, a sickly greenish light that cast eerie shadows across the clearing. And moving between the trees surrounding the circle were the shadows, the hungry ones. There were more of them now, at least a dozen, gliding with that wrong, fluid motion that made Ben's skin crawl. The blood returns. The voice wasn't aloud but inside their heads. The payment comes. We're not here as payment, Rebecca called out. We're here to end the compact. A sound like dry leaves rustling filled the clearing. Laughter. Ben realized with a chill. The compact is eternal. The blood is bound. The fear is owed. Rebecca set down her backpack and began removing items. Candles, a small bowl, a knife with an ornate handle, and a bottle of clear liquid. Set up the candles at each pillar, she instructed Ben, her voice steady despite the shadows drawing closer. I'll prepare the ritual. Ben moved to the first stone pillar, placing a candle at its base. As he did, the shadows retreated slightly, as if wary of the flame. He continued around the circle, watching as Rebecca poured the clear liquid into the bowl and began reciting words in a language he didn't recognize. By the time he'd placed the last candle, the shadows had formed a complete circle around them, just beyond the stones. They pulsed and shifted, growing more solid with each passing moment. The fear rises. We taste it. Sweet, nourishing. Ben felt it then. A cold tendril of something brushing against his mind, seeking entry. Images flashed before him. The little girl from Boston, her body small and broken. The press conference where he'd been vilified. The night terrors that had haunted him since. Ben! Rebecca's voice cut through the visions. Fight it. They're trying to feed. He focused on her face, on the candles, on the ritual they needed to complete. The mental assault receded slightly. Rebecca handed him the knife. We both need to add blood to the bowl. Then recite the words I taught you. Together. Ben took the knife, making a small cut on his palm. The blood welled up, dark in the candlelight. He held his hand over the bowl, letting several drops fall into the clear liquid, which immediately began to swirl and change color. Rebecca did the same, her expression determined despite the shadows pressing closer, despite the whispers growing louder in their minds. The blood is ours. The fear is ours. You are ours. The temperature dropped further. Ben's breath came out in white plumes. The candles flickered, nearly extinguishing. Now, Rebecca said, gripping his bloodied hand with her own. The words. Together, they began to recite the ritual Rebecca had found in her grandmother's notes. What was bound is now released. What was awakened returns to sleep. The compact made in blood and fear is broken by blood and courage. The gateway closes. The hunger ends. The shadows return beyond the veil. The effect was immediate. The shadows recoiled as if struck, their formless bodies writhing. The air in the clearing began to move, a wind that hadn't been there before, circling the stones. No, the compact, the feeding. The voice was angry now, a howl that tore at Ben's mind. The mental assault intensified. Not just memories now, but primal fears, terror in its purest form. He gripped Rebecca's hand tighter, forcing himself to continue the ritual. By the blood of two branches, by the will of the descendants, we revoke what William Burroughs began. We close what he opened. We end what he started. The shadows surged forward, no longer held back by the stone circle. One wrapped around Ben's leg, ice cold and burning at the same time. Another seized Rebecca's arm, drawing a cry of pain from her. You will feed us. Your fear. Your life. Through the pain, Ben reached for the pendant around his neck. It glowed brightly now, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Rebecca's tattoo shone with the same light. We're not afraid of you, Ben gasped, though it wasn't entirely true. You have no power here anymore. Rebecca raised the bowl, her hands shaking but her voice strong. Return to the darkness. Return to the void. Return to the hunger that cannot be filled. She poured the contents of the bowl onto the ground in the center of the circle. The liquid, now crimson and glowing, sizzled when it touched the earth. A crack appeared in the ground, widening rapidly into a fissure that emanated an otherworldly light. The shadows released them, drawn toward the opening like metal to a magnet. They writhed and twisted, their forms stretching as they were pulled inexorably toward the fissure. No, the compact, the hunger. It's over, Ben shouted above the howling wind. The deal is broken. The largest shadow, the one that had spoken most clearly, reared up, its form solidifying into something almost human. It lunged at Ben, cold fingers closing around his throat just as they had before. But this time, Ben didn't feel fear. He stared directly into the void where a face should be and saw nothing, just emptiness, hunger without purpose, fear without reason. You're nothing, he said softly, just shadows and whispers. The creature's grip faltered. Ben reached up and pressed the pendant against it. There was a sound like glass shattering, and the shadow disintegrated, pulled into the fissure with the others. One by one, the hungry ones were dragged into the opening in the earth. The last one, clinging to the edge of the fissure, turned what might have been a face toward Ben and Rebecca. "We will return. The hunger always returns." Then it too was gone, and the fissure snapped closed with a sound like thunder. The forest was suddenly, blissfully silent. The candles burned steadily now, no longer threatened by supernatural wind. The stone pillars stood as they had for centuries, but the symbols etched into them had stopped glowing, now just ordinary carvings in weathered rock. Rebecca sagged against one of the pillars, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Is it over?" Ben looked around the clearing, extending his senses for any hint of the wrongness that had permeated the woods before. There was nothing, just the normal sounds of a forest at night, owls hooting, branches creaking. "I think so," he said, helping her to her feet. "We did it." They gathered their supplies in silence, both too drained for conversation. As they turned to leave the clearing, Rebecca paused, looking back at the stone circle. "My family lived with this for generations. Fed it, feared it." She shook her head. "All because one man wanted power and prosperity badly enough to make a deal with darkness. Some shadows are harder to banish than others," Ben said quietly. Rebecca studied him. "Will you stay?" In King's Hollow, Ben thought about it, about Boston and the ghosts he'd been running from, about the strange connection he now had to this town, to the Burroughs bloodline. "For a while," he said finally. "There are still questions I need answers to." They walked back through the woods, the path easier to follow now, as if the forest itself had lightened. By the time they reached their cars, dawn was breaking in the east, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Thank you," Rebecca said, extending her hand, "for helping end my family's curse." Ben shook it, feeling an odd kinship with this woman he barely knew. "What will you do now?" "Research. There's so much I still don't understand about what happened here, about the creatures, about how William found them in the first place." She smiled tiredly. "And maybe try to live a normal life, whatever that means." As she drove away, Ben stood watching the sunrise over King's Hollow. The town looked different somehow, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from it. His phone buzzed. "Sheriff Dorsey, any developments I should know about?" Ben typed a response. "Situation resolved. I'll explain everything later." He put the phone away and got into his car. The pendant hung from his rearview mirror, catching the morning light. Just an ordinary silver disc now, its power dormant. Ben started the engine but didn't immediately drive away. Instead, he sat watching the sun climb higher over the pines, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The shadows were gone. Both the supernatural ones that had haunted King's Hollow for generations, and the personal ones that had driven him from Boston. For now, at least, the feeding time was over. The end. The Hollowing, Part 1, Arrival. Daniel Reed watched the water tower of Millhaven appear on the horizon, its faded blue paint peeling off in long strips like dead skin. According to the realtor's directions, he was close now. Just another 5 miles until he reached what would become his new home. Maybe even his salvation if he was lucky. Though luck hadn't exactly been on his side lately. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, his palms slick with sweat despite the February chill. The rental truck's heater wheezed asthmatically, barely keeping the windshield from fogging. Outside, the main landscape was a palette of grays and browns. Trees stripped bare, fields lying dormant under a low, bruised sky. It had the feeling of a place holding its breath. "Almost there," he said aloud, the sound of his voice startling in the cabin's silence. He'd left Boston 14 hours ago, driving straight through, stopping only for gas and bitter truck stop coffee that now sat sour in his stomach. His cell phone, propped against the dashboard, hadn't shown a signal bar for the last hour. It didn't matter. No one would be calling anyway. Not since Ellen's funeral 3 months ago. Not since the incident at work 6 weeks later. Not since his so-called friends had quietly excused themselves from his life. one by one, like dinner guests politely leaving a party that had turned uncomfortable. The narrow road wound through a stand of skeletal birches. He passed a weathered sign, "Welcome to Millhaven, Pope 842, and felt a curious lightening in his chest. A fresh start. That's what he needed. That's what Dr. Kaplan had said. Place where no one knows you, Daniel. Where you can rebuild. And what better place than his late uncle's house? A house he'd visited just once as a child, remembered only in fragments. Creaking floorboards, a musty smell, and his mother's tight grip on his shoulder as she'd whispered, "Don't wander off." Uncle Wallace had died alone in that house 6 months ago. The lawyer's letter had caught Daniel by surprise. He hadn't even known he was in the will. A stroke of luck when he needed it most. The town of Millhaven unfolded before him. A main street lined with brick buildings from another century, their facades time-worn but dignified. A hardware store, a diner called Molly's, a small library, and a post office. Normal, ordinary, safe. He drove through slowly, aware of a few curious glances from pedestrians bundled against the cold. The directions led him out the other side of town, down a rutted road that followed the contours of what the map called Hatchet Lake. The water was slate gray and utterly still, reflecting the winter sky like a perfect mirror, beautiful in a desolate sort of way. 2 miles past the lake, a mailbox marked Reed stood sentinel at the head of a gravel driveway. Daniel turned in, the truck bouncing over frozen ruts. Through the trees, he caught his first glimpse of the house. It was larger than he remembered, a 2-story Victorian with peeling white paint and black shutters. A wide porch wrapped around the front, its railing sagging in places. The gabled roof rose to a sharp peak, crowned by a widow's walk surrounded by ornate iron railings. One of the upstairs windows was boarded over. Daniel parked in front of the detached garage and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, he could hear the wind sighing through the pines that enclosed the property like sentinels. The house loomed before him, windows blank and dark, watching his arrival with indifference. Home. This was home now. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the heavy iron key the lawyer had sent. It felt cold against his palm, as if it had been lying in snow. "Well," Daniel muttered, opening the truck door. "Here goes nothing." The air outside hit him like a slap, raw, damp cold that found every opening in his clothing. The sky had darkened further, and he smelled snow on the wind. He hurried up the walkway, boots crunching on frozen gravel. The porch steps groaned under his weight. At the front door, solid oak with a tarnished brass knocker shaped like a lion's head, he hesitated. A strange reluctance gripped him, as if crossing this threshold would set something irreversible in motion. "Don't be ridiculous," he told himself. "It's just a house. Just wood and nails and plaster." The key turned stiffly in the lock. The door swung inward with a low moan of hinges that hadn't been oiled in years. Daniel stepped inside. The foyer was dim, lit only by what feeble daylight filtered through dusty windows. To his right, a staircase curved upward into darkness. To his left, a parlor with sheet-draped furniture. Straight ahead, a hallway disappeared into the depths of the house. The air smelled of neglect, dust and mildew and something else, something faintly chemical that reminded him of the hospital where Ellen had spent her final weeks. He swallowed hard against the memory. He fumbled along the wall until his fingers found a light switch. He flipped it. Nothing happened. "Great," he muttered. "Power's out." But then he remembered the lawyer mentioning that the utilities wouldn't be connected until tomorrow. He should have arrived in daylight, should have planned better. But the urgency to leave Boston, to escape the whispers and sidelong glances, had overridden common sense. From somewhere deep in the house came a soft thud, as if something heavy had fallen. Daniel froze, listening. Nothing but silence followed. "Hello?" he called, feeling foolish even as he did so. His voice sounded muffled, as if the house had swallowed the sound. No response. Of course not. The place had been empty for months, probably just the house settling, or a branch hitting a window. Still, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He shook off the feeling, blaming it on fatigue and the unfamiliar surroundings. He needed to bring in his essentials, find the bedroom, and get some sleep. Tomorrow he'd have power and could properly explore his inheritance. He turned to head back to the truck and froze. On the dusty hardwood floor, clearly visible in the gray light from the still open door, was a set of footprints. Small, child-sized footprints leading from the hallway to the staircase. Wet footprints. As he stared, the last print glistened, then slowly began to dry, fading before his eyes until it was nothing but a smudge in the dust. Daniel blinked hard, then rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. When he looked again, the floor was unmarked, just dust and shadow. "Christ!" he whispered. "I need sleep." He backed out onto the porch, not taking his eyes off the spot where he'd seen, or thought he'd seen, those small, wet prints. Only when the door was firmly shut and locked did he let out the breath he'd been holding. The wind had picked up, making the old house creak and mutter. A few fat snowflakes began to fall, melting as they hit the ground. Daniel hurried to the truck, suddenly eager to get his sleeping bag and necessities inside before dark fell completely. As he hauled his duffel bag from the cab, something made him look up at the house again. For just an instant, so briefly he might have imagined it, he thought he saw a pale face watching him from the boarded-up window on the second floor. Then it was gone, and there was nothing but weathered wood and encroaching night. Just tired, he told himself, shouldering his bag. Just seeing things. But as he approached the house again, key in hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that the place was somehow more awake now, that it had noticed his arrival and was considering what to do about it. "Don't wander off," his mother had whispered all those years ago. And now he remembered something else. The way she'd hurried him back to the car, the way she'd driven a little too fast down the gravel driveway, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, the way she'd never brought him back. Daniel stood on the porch, snow falling around him in the gathering darkness, and wondered, not for the first time, if he'd made a terrible mistake. Part 2, Echoes. Daniel woke with sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, momentarily disoriented. The unfamiliar ceiling above him, water-stained and cracked, brought the previous day rushing back. He was in Millhaven, in Uncle Wallace's, no, his house. He'd spent an uncomfortable night in his sleeping bag on the master bedroom floor, too exhausted to care about the dust and cobwebs. Now, in the unforgiving clarity of morning, he took stock of his surroundings. The room was spacious but shabby. Faded wallpaper curled at the seams, revealing patches of plaster beneath. A heavy oak dresser stood against one wall, its mirror clouded with age. The bed frame, stripped of mattress and linens, dominated the center of the room, an ornate Victorian piece with posts that reached toward the ceiling like grasping fingers. Daniel rubbed his face, feeling the stubble on his jaw. His reflection in the dresser mirror was a blurred ghost, hollow-eyed, pale, the scar on his right temple still livid against his skin. He looked away quickly. His watch read 8:17. The utilities company was supposed to arrive by 9 to connect the power and water. Coffee would have to wait until then. He pulled on jeans and a flannel shirt, avoiding his own reflection. The events of the previous evening, the wet footprints, the face at the window, seemed absurd in daylight. Just the product of an overtired mind in an unfamiliar place. Still, as he made his way downstairs, he found himself scanning the dusty floor for evidence. Nothing but his own boot prints disrupted the layer of neglect that covered everything. The house was cold but not unbearable. February in Maine meant temperatures that hovered around freezing, but at least the interior walls provided shelter from the wind that rattled the windows. Daniel explored methodically, trying to orient himself in what would be his home for however long it took to put himself back together. The first floor contained the formal parlor he'd glimpsed last night, plus a dining room with a massive table that could seat 12, a small study lined with bookshelves, and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Everything was coated in dust, the furniture shrouded in yellowed sheets like patient ghosts. It was in the kitchen that Daniel found the first strange thing. Someone had been here recently. The countertop near the sink had been wiped clean, leaving a stark rectangle of white formica amid the general grime. And on that clean patch sat a mug, plain white ceramic, rimmed with what looked like cold coffee. Daniel approached it warily. He touched the mug. It was cool to the touch. He lifted it and sniffed the contents. Coffee, definitely, and not freshly brewed. Had his uncle left it here before he died? No, impossible. The lawyer had mentioned that a service had been hired to clean out perishables after Wallace's death. Besides, coffee wouldn't still be liquid after 6 months. It would have evaporated to a sticky residue. So who had been in his house? And when? The back door was locked from the inside. The key still in the deadbolt. Daniel checked the front door, also locked, just as he'd left it. All the ground floor windows were shut tight against the winter cold. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crept up his spine. He returned to the kitchen and emptied the mug in the sink, watching the dark liquid swirl down the drain. When he turned on the faucet out of habit, nothing happened, of course. No water yet. The sound of tires on gravel outside was a welcome distraction. Daniel peered through the kitchen window to see a utility truck pulling up. The Millhaven Power and Water logo was emblazoned on its door. 2 men emerged, one older, with a salt and pepper beard, the other barely out of his teens. Both wore heavy canvas jackets with the utility company's patch. Daniel met them at the front door. "Mr. Reed?" the older man asked, extending a work-roughened hand. "I'm Jim Garrity. This is my son, Pete. We're here to get you connected." Daniel shook hands with both men, noticing how Jim's gaze lingered on the scar at his temple. "Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure what time to expect you. We like to get an early start," Jim said, his main accent stretching the vowels. "Especially up here. Roads can get bad when the weather turns." He gestured toward the sky, which had cleared overnight. "But looks like you got lucky. Storm blew through quick. Snow's coming back tomorrow, though," Pete added. "Big one, they're saying." Jim nodded at the house. "Haven't been out here since Wallace passed. Place holding up okay?" "It needs work," Daniel admitted, "but it's structurally sound as far as I can tell." "Wallace wasn't much for upkeep in his later years," Jim said, a note of something, disapproval, in his voice. "Not after what happened with his boy." Daniel frowned. "His boy? I didn't know my uncle had children." Jim and Pete exchanged a glance. "Well," Jim said carefully, "I suppose it's not my place to gossip. Ancient history anyway. Let's get your utilities running." Pete checked the breaker box. "I'll handle the water main." Daniel watched as they set to work, wondering about Jim's reluctance to discuss his uncle's child. He hadn't known Wallace had a son. In fact, he knew almost nothing about his uncle's life. His mother had rarely spoken of her older brother, and when she did, it was with a mixture of pity and unease. While the utility men worked, Daniel continued his exploration of the house. The second floor contained 4 bedrooms and a bathroom with clawfoot tub. The smallest bedroom had clearly belonged to a child. Faded sports pennants still hung on the walls, and a model airplane dangled from the ceiling on a length of fishing line. But there were no photos, no personal items that might tell him more about his uncle's son. The door to one bedroom was locked. Daniel tried the knob several times, then made a mental note to look for the key later. Beyond the second floor, a narrow staircase led to the attic, but that door was also locked. By the time he returned downstairs, Jim and Pete had finished their work. "All set," Jim announced. "Power's on, water's running. Furnace kicked in too. Should warm up in here pretty quick." As if on cue, the ancient radiators began to clank and hiss. "Great," Daniel said. "What do I owe you?" Jim waved him off. "Already taken care of. Your lawyer settled the account." "Oh, well, thanks for coming out." Jim hesitated, then said, "You planning to stay long?" The question caught Daniel off guard. "I'm not sure. Maybe." "Why?" Jim shrugged. "Just wondering. This place has been empty a long time. Even before Wallace died, he wasn't really here, if you know what I mean." "Not really," Daniel admitted. "Just." Jim seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Just be careful is all. Old houses like this, they can have quirks." Before Daniel could ask what he meant, Pete called from outside, "Dad, we gotta go. Mannings are expecting us by 10. Jim nodded. Take care, Mr. Reed. Town's small, so I'm sure we'll see each other around. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, almost forgot. Found this by your meter. He handed Daniel a small object, a child's toy soldier, about 2 inches tall. The green paint was chipped, one arm missing. Probably been there for decades, Jim said, but thought you might want it, being family and all. Daniel thanked him, turning the small figure over in his palm as the utility truck pulled away. The toy felt wrong somehow. Not just old, but inexplicably cold, as if it had been lying in a freezer rather than buried in the main soil. Back inside, with the power now on, Daniel set about making the house more livable. He found cleaning supplies under the kitchen sink and spent the morning attacking the worst of the grime. By noon, he had cleared enough space in the kitchen to unpack some groceries he'd brought from the last convenience store before Millhaven. As he made a sandwich, the house settling around him with sighs and creaks as it warmed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Several times he caught himself turning quickly, expecting to find someone standing in the doorway, but there was never anyone there. Get a grip, Reed, he told himself. You're alone. That's the whole point. After lunch, he decided to tackle the study. The room was small but well-proportioned, with built-in bookshelves on 3 walls. A roll-top desk occupied the 4th wall, positioned beneath a window that looked out over what had once been a garden, now overgrown and wild. The desk was locked, but Daniel found a ring of keys in the kitchen junk drawer. The 3rd key he tried turned smoothly in the lock, and the roll-top slid up with a satisfying clatter of wooden slats. Inside was a treasure trove of information about Wallace Reed. Carefully organized folders contained tax records, correspondence, and what appeared to be research notes. His uncle had been a professor of folklore at a small college in Portland, but it was the leather-bound journal at the back of a drawer that caught Daniel's attention. The cover was unmarked, the pages yellowed with age. He opened it to find his uncle's spidery handwriting filling page after page. It was a diary dating back to 1987. Daniel flipped through it, catching glimpses of his uncle's life. Many entries were mundane, weather reports, notes on classes taught, complaints about colleagues. But then he found an entry that made him pause. April 18th, 1987. Timothy continues to worsen. The night terrors have become a nightly occurrence. Last night I found him standing in the upstairs hallway, staring at nothing, his eyes open but unseeing. When I touched his shoulder, he screamed. A sound I hope never to hear again. He keeps talking about the hollow children, says they want him to join them in the thin place. Dr. Reynolds insists it's just childhood anxiety, exacerbated by Marianne's death. But I know my son. Something is happening to him. Something I don't understand. Daniel frowned. Timothy must be the son Jim had mentioned. And Marianne, Wallace's wife? He hadn't known about her either. He flipped forward a few pages. May 2nd, 1987. Found Timothy sleepwalking again. This time he was trying to get into the attic. When I asked him why, he said that's where they live. I started locking his bedroom door at night, but I'm afraid to leave him like that. What if there's a fire? But I'm more afraid of where he might wander if not confined. The medication Dr. Reynolds prescribed doesn't seem to help. If anything, it makes him more susceptible to whatever influence is taking hold of him. Another entry, the handwriting increasingly frantic. May 10th, 1987. Timothy drew another picture today. Like the others, those stick figures with the hollow middles. But this one had names written beneath each figure. One of them was his own name. When I asked about the other names, he said they were his hollow friends. Said they're waiting for him. I recognized one name, Peter Dawson, a boy who drowned in Hatchet Lake in 1968. I was just a boy myself then, but I remember the search parties. They never found his body. I've hidden the drawings. I can't bear to look at them. The faces, those empty circles with nothing but black scribbles where eyes should be. No child should draw such things. Daniel felt a chill despite the now functioning heat. He glanced up, half expecting to see someone watching from the doorway. But the house was silent except for the occasional pop of an expanding floorboard. He turned to the next entry, May 15th, 1987. Timothy is gone. The words were scrawled across the page, the pen having torn through the paper in places. Nothing more for that date. The next entry came 3 days later, May 18th, 1987. Third day of searching. Sheriff Dunham is talking about dragging the lake, but I know they won't find him there. Timothy hated the water. Ever since Marianne, I keep thinking about the attic, about how desperately he wanted to get in there, but I've searched it thoroughly. Nothing but old furniture and boxes of Marianne's things. Nothing a child would be drawn to. When I sleep, rarely now, I dream of Timothy. In the dreams, he's always standing with other children. Pale, silent children whose faces I can never quite see. They hold hands in a circle like a grotesque game of ring around the rosy. In the center of their circle is a kind of darkness. Not just an absence of light, but something active, hungry. Something that wants. I wake from these dreams more exhausted than when I went to sleep. The house feels different now. Watchful. Waiting. I catch glimpses of movement at the corners of my vision. The sound of small feet on the stairs when no one is there. I fear I'm losing my mind. Or worse, that I'm perfectly sane and what I'm experiencing is real. Daniel closed the journal, his heart pounding. The toy soldier Jim had given him seemed to burn in his pocket. He took it out and placed it on the desk, not wanting to touch it anymore. From upstairs came a sound. Soft, barely there, but unmistakable. Footsteps. Small, quick footsteps moving from one room to another. Then silence. Daniel sat frozen, straining to hear. Nothing but the normal sounds of an old house. The tick of cooling metal, the groan of timbers. He should go upstairs and check. That would be the rational thing to do. But fear held him in place. A fear he hadn't felt since the night Ellen died. When he'd stood in the wreckage of their car and watched headlights approach through the rain, knowing with terrible certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The last light of day was fading outside the study window. Soon the house would be full of shadows, full of places where something could hide. Something like the pale face he'd glimpsed last night, or the owner of those wet footprints. Or both. Daniel forced himself to stand, to walk to the doorway of the study. The hallway stretched before him, ending at the staircase that led to the second floor. Everything was still normal. And then, drifting down from above, came the sound of a child's laughter, high, sweet, and terribly wrong in the empty house. Part 3. The thin place. Daniel bolted up the stairs, fear giving way to a strange, reckless anger. "Who's there?" he shouted as he reached the second floor landing. "This isn't funny." Silence answered him. The upstairs hallway stretched in both directions, doors standing open to rooms he'd explored earlier, all except that one locked bedroom. Afternoon light slanted through dusty windows, painting rectangles of gold on the faded carpet runner. Nothing moved. No one was there. And yet, that laughter, he couldn't have imagined it. It had been too clear, too present. Daniel moved down the hall, checking each room methodically. The master bedroom, still containing only his sleeping bag and duffel. The bathroom, fixtures dripping now that the water was on. The child's room with its model airplanes. A guest bedroom, musty with disuse. All empty. He stopped before the locked door at the end of the hall. Had the sound come from in there? He tried the knob again, rattling it uselessly. "Hello?" he called, pressing his ear to the wooden panel. "Is someone in there?" Nothing. Daniel returned to his ring of discovered keys and tried each one in the lock. None worked. Frustrated, he put his shoulder to the door and pushed. The old wood groaned but held firm. Above him, the ceiling creaked. Someone walking in the attic. Daniel's mouth went dry. He stared up at the white expanse above his head, tracing the invisible movement with his eyes. Deliberate footsteps, crossing from one side to the other. Too heavy to be a squirrel or raccoon. The narrow staircase to the attic was at the opposite end of the hall. Daniel approached it slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. The door at the top was still locked, just as he'd found it that morning. But now something had changed. A dark liquid seeped from beneath the door, forming a small puddle on the top step. Daniel reached out a trembling hand and touched it. Water, cold lake water, smelling of weeds and silt. He stumbled back, wiping his fingers on his jeans. Impossible. There couldn't be standing water in the attic. Unless the roof was leaking, but it hadn't rained since he'd arrived. And this wasn't rainwater. This was murky, organic, the kind of water you'd find at the bottom of a lake. From the attic came another sound, a soft shuffling, like multiple pairs of small feet moving across the floor. Then whispers, too faint to make out words but unmistakably childlike. "Who's up there?" Daniel shouted, his voice cracking. "Answer me." The shuffling stopped. The whispers ceased. For a long moment, there was absolute silence. Then, so softly he almost missed it, a child's voice said, "Come play with us, Daniel." He knew his name. Daniel backed away from the attic door, nearly stumbling down the main staircase in his haste. He needed to get out of the house, just for a while, just to clear his head and figure out what the hell was happening. Outside, the day was waning, the sun a pale disk low on the horizon. Daniel's breath formed clouds in the cold air as he hurried to his truck. The vehicle, solid, modern, normal, was a reassuring sight. He climbed in and started the engine, the familiar rumble grounding him. Without really deciding where to go, he backed down the driveway and headed toward town, away from the house, away from whatever presence had called his name in a child's sing-song voice. Millhaven's main street was quiet in the late afternoon. A few cars parked outside the diner, lights glowing warmly in the gathering dusk. Daniel pulled in, desperate for human contact. Inside, Molly's Diner was a time capsule from the 1950s, chrome-edged tables, vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner playing something by Buddy Holly. A bell jingled as Daniel entered, and several heads turned briefly in his direction before returning to conversations or plates of food. He slid into a booth by the window where he could keep an eye on his truck. A waitress approached, middle-aged, bottle blonde, with a name tag that read, Darlene. "What can I get you, Han?" she asked, pencil poised over a small pad. "Coffee," Daniel said, "and whatever's good for dinner. Meat loaf's the special. Comes with mashed potatoes and green beans." "That sounds perfect." Darlene nodded and moved away. Daniel rubbed his temples, the beginnings of a headache pulsing behind his eyes. What had happened back at the house? Had he really heard voices, or was his mind playing tricks? He'd been under immense strain for months. Maybe this wasn't supernatural at all. Maybe he was finally cracking up. The coffee arrived, black and steaming. Daniel wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into his cold fingers. "You're Wallace Reed's nephew, aren't you?" Daniel looked up to find an older man sliding into the seat across from him. He was tall and lean, with a weathered face and sharp blue eyes beneath bushy gray brows. A sheriff's badge gleamed on his jacket. "Yes," Daniel said cautiously. "I'm Daniel Reed." "Thought so. Jim Garrity mentioned you'd moved into the old Reed place." The man extended a hand. "Sheriff Roy Dunham. I knew your uncle." Daniel shook his hand, recognizing the name from Wallace's journal. "You were there when his son disappeared." Something flickered across Dunham's face, surprise and something else. Wariness, maybe. "That's right," he said slowly. "Though that was a long time ago. Almost 40 years now. What happened to him? To Timothy?" Dunham was silent for a moment, his eyes never leaving Daniel's face. Finally, he said, "Why don't you tell me why you're asking?" Daniel hesitated. How much should he reveal? That he'd heard children's voices in his empty house? That he'd seen wet footprints appear and disappear? That he'd found water seeping from under the attic door? He'd sound insane. "I found my uncle's journal," he said instead. He wrote about Timothy's disappearance, about night terrors, and drawings of what he called hollow children. Dunham's expression remained carefully neutral, but his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his coffee mug. Wallace was not well after Timothy vanished. Grief does strange things to a person's mind. "So you don't believe what he wrote? About the voices, the children Timothy said he saw?" The sheriff sighed. "What I believe doesn't matter much. What matters is what happened. And what happened is that an 8-year-old boy vanished without a trace. We searched for weeks. The whole town turned out. But we never found him. And no one ever saw him again? No. Body was recovered. No, Dunham said quietly, which is unusual around here. Hatchet Lake doesn't keep its secrets forever. Things that go in tend to come back up. Eventually, Daniel thought of the water seeping from beneath the attic door, of the wet footprints in the foyer. You think he drowned? It's the most likely explanation. The lake was the first place we looked. But my uncle wrote that Timothy hated the water. Dunham shrugged. Kids do all sorts of things they're afraid of, especially when dared by other kids. Or maybe he fell in by accident. We'll never know for sure. What about the other children my uncle mentioned? The ones in Timothy's drawings. For the first time, Dunham looked uncomfortable. He glanced around the diner, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. Look, Mr. Reed, Millhaven is a small town with a long memory. Some stories, they get passed down, embellished, become local legends. That doesn't make them true. What stories? Dunham hesitated. There've been other children who've gone missing over the years. Not many, maybe one every decade or so. Always in the spring. Always from families that live around the lake. Like Peter Dawson? Daniel asked, remembering the name from Wallace's journal. Dunham's eyes narrowed. Yes, like Peter. But that was before my time as sheriff. Before I was even born, in fact. And nothing connects these disappearances? No pattern or... I didn't say that, Dunham interrupted. There are similarities. Reports of night terrors before the disappearances. Children talking about seeing other children who weren't there. Drawing strange pictures. Hollow children, Daniel murmured. Dunham nodded slowly. That's the local name for them, yes. But Mr. Reed, this is all just folklore. The kind of stories people tell around campfires. My uncle was a folklore professor, Daniel said. He wouldn't have confused legend with reality. Maybe not at first, Dunham conceded. But after Timothy, well, like I said, grief changes people. Darlene appeared with Daniel's meatloaf, setting the plate down with a cheerful, "Here you go, hon." Dunham stood. I should let you eat while it's hot. But Mr. Reed, a word of advice. That house has a reputation. People around here give it a wide berth. Has for decades, even before Timothy disappeared. If I were you, I'd consider selling it. Moving somewhere less complicated. Why does it have a reputation? Dunham seemed to weigh his words carefully. The land it sits on, it's what the old Abenaki called a thin place. A spot where the boundary between our world and whatever's on the other side isn't as solid as it should be. You believe that? What I believe, Dunham said, is that that house has seen more than its share of tragedy. And not just your family's. He tipped his hat. Good evening, Mr. Reed. Welcome to Millhaven. Daniel watched him leave, then turned to his cooling dinner with little appetite. Outside, darkness had fallen completely. His truck sat alone in the parking lot, a thin layer of frost already forming on its windshield. He forced himself to eat, knowing he needed strength for what? To face whatever waited for him at the house? To pack up and leave, as Dunham had suggested? No, he couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until he understood what had happened to Timothy. What was happening to him now? Because one thing was becoming increasingly clear. The house wasn't empty. And whoever was there knew his name and wanted him to come play. By the time Daniel paid his bill and stepped outside, a light snow had begun to fall. He brushed accumulation from his windshield and climbed into the truck, the engine turning over with a reassuring growl. The drive back to the house seemed longer in the dark. The headlights carved a tunnel through the falling snow, trees looming like sentinels on either side of the narrow road. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tightly, fighting the urge to turn around, to head back toward town, toward light and people and normality. As he crested the final hill before his property, Daniel's headlights swept across the Reed house. It stood silhouetted against the night sky, windows dark except for one. the attic window glowing with a faint bluish light. Daniel's breath caught. He hadn't left any lights on. He was certain of it. As he watched, a shadow moved across the attic window, small, child-sized. Then another, and another. His first instinct was to drive away, to return to town and ask Sheriff Dunham for help. But what would he say? That he'd seen shadows in his attic? That he'd heard children's voices in an empty house? Dunham already thought he was following in his uncle's delusional footsteps. No, he had to face this himself. Daniel parked the truck and approached the house, snow crunching beneath his boots. The porch steps seemed to groan louder tonight, as if warning him away. At the front door he hesitated, key in hand. Inside was darkness, silence, and whatever had called his name in a child's voice. He unlocked the door and stepped into the foyer, flipping on the light switch. The overhead fixture sputtered to life, casting harsh shadows. Nothing had changed since he'd left. No new footprints, no waiting figures. He strained to listen. The house creaked and settled around him, but there were no footsteps, no whispers. The attic, which had seemed so alive with movement when viewed from outside, was silent now. Daniel moved through the first floor, turning on lights as he went. The kitchen was as he'd left it. The study door still stood open, Wallace's journal where he'd abandoned it on the desk. The toy soldier was gone. A cold knot formed in Daniel's stomach. He searched the desktop, bending to look under furniture. The small green figure had vanished. He turned to leave the study and froze. Standing in the doorway was a child, a boy of perhaps 8 or 9, dressed in faded corduroy pants and a striped sweater that might once have been bright but now was washed to pale pastels. His feet were bare and wet, leaving small puddles on the hardwood floor. His hair was plastered to his head as if he'd just emerged from water, but it was his face that made Daniel's blood run cold. The boy's features were normal enough, round cheeks, snub nose, small chin, but his eyes were wrong. They weren't eyes at all, but circular hollows that seemed to tunnel back into his head, revealing nothing but darkness. And through those hollow eyes, Daniel could see the wallpaper behind the boy's head. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. Terror held him rooted to the spot. The boy tilted his head, studying Daniel with those impossible, empty eyes. When he spoke, his voice was the same one Daniel had heard from the attic. "Will you come play with us now, Daniel? We've been waiting for you." "Who?" Daniel's voice broke. He swallowed and tried again. "Who are you?" "I'm Timothy," the boy said, as if it were obvious. "Uncle Wallace's son. Your cousin." Daniel shook his head, taking an involuntary step back. Timothy disappeared 40 years ago. He'd be a middle-aged man now if he were alive. The hollow boy, Timothy, smiled. It was a terrible expression on that waterlogged face. "Time works differently in the thin place. I'm still 8. I'll always be 8. What do you want from me?" Timothy's head tilted to the other side, a curiously bird-like motion. "We want you to join us, to become hollow like us. It doesn't hurt, not much, and afterward you don't feel anything at all." The boy took a step forward. Daniel backed away until he felt the edge of the desk pressing against his spine. "Stay back," he warned, though his voice trembled. "Don't come any closer." Timothy stopped, that awful smile still fixed on his face. "You can't run from us, Daniel. We're already inside you. We've been inside you since the accident." Daniel's hand flew to the scar on his temple, the souvenir of the crash that had killed Ellen. "What are you talking about?" "The hollow place," Timothy said. "It's not just here in this house. It's wherever the barriers are thin, like at crossroads on rainy nights, when metal tears and blood spills and souls slip through the cracks." Images flashed through Daniel's mind, headlights glaring through a rain-streaked windshield, the sick crunch of impact, Ellen's scream cut horribly short, and something else, something he'd never let himself remember. A figure standing in the road just before the crash. A child's figure, pale and hollow-eyed in the glare of the high beams. "No," Daniel whispered. That wasn't real." "We're all real," Timothy said. Another step forward. "Me, Peter. all the hollow children who came before, and the ones who'll come after. Another step. Like you, Daniel, you're already starting to hollow out. I can see it in your eyes. Daniel looked wildly around for escape. The only way out was the doorway where Timothy stood. Could he rush past the boy? Would his hands pass through that insubstantial form? Or would he feel cold, wet flesh? Why me? He demanded, playing for time. Why did you choose me? Timothy's smile widened. We didn't.
You chose us.
When you decided to come here to the thin place. When you opened the door and let us in. One more step. Close enough now that Daniel could smell the lake water dripping from the boy's clothes. But mostly because you were already hollow inside. Already empty and wanting to be filled. With a sudden, desperate lunge, Daniel pushed past the boy, his shoulder brushing cold wetness that soaked instantly through his shirt. He stumbled into the hallway, gasping. Timothy didn't pursue him. The hollow boy simply turned, that terrible smile never faltering. You can't leave, Daniel. None of us can. The house won't let you. Watch me, Daniel choked out. He turned and ran for the front door, feet pounding on the hardwood. The door was just ahead, his way out, but when he reached for the knob, another hand was already there. A small, pale hand attached to a girl of about 6, her hair in wet pigtails, her eyes the same hollow tunnels as Timothy's. Won't you stay and play? She asked, her voice like water trickling over stones. Daniel recoiled, spinning toward the kitchen and the back door. But that exit too was guarded. A boy in old-fashioned clothes, maybe 12, his hollow eyes fixed on Daniel with hungry intent. The longer you run, Timothy's voice called from behind him, the harder it will be. Let us in, Daniel. Let us fill the empty places inside you. Daniel bolted for the stairs. If he couldn't get out, he'd barricade himself in the master bedroom. By time to think, to plan. The stairs seemed longer tonight, the climb steeper. Halfway up, he glanced back and saw them. Not just 3 hollow children now, but a dozen or more, emerging from shadows, from corners, from nowhere at all. A silent, watching procession. At the top of the stairs, Daniel turned toward the master bedroom and stopped short. The previously locked door at the end of the hall now stood open. Beyond it, pale blue light spilled out, casting the same eerie glow he'd seen from outside. The light seemed to pulse, to breathe with a life of its own. Timothy's voice drifted up from below. The thin place, Daniel. That's where we all go in the end. That's where you belong. The hollow children had begun to climb the stairs, moving with the inexorable patience of the dead. Daniel backed away from them, toward the open door and its strange light. He knew he shouldn't go in there. Every instinct screamed danger, but the advancing children left him no choice. He stepped through the doorway into the formerly locked room. It was empty of furniture, the floor and walls bare except for hundreds of children's drawings tacked up in overlapping layers. The blue light emanated from the center of the room, where the floorboards had been pried up to reveal nothing, a void, a perfect circle of absolute darkness that somehow gave off light. Daniel stared, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. It was as if a hole had been cut in reality itself, revealing the nothing that lay beyond. The thin place, the hollow at the center of everything. Around its circumference, small objects had been carefully arranged. Toys, trinkets, a child's shoe, a battered baseball cap. And Daniel saw with a jolt the toy soldier Jim Garrity had given him that morning. From behind him came the soft padding of bare feet on hardwood. Daniel turned to find the doorway filled with hollow children, Timothy at their center. They made no move to enter the room, simply watching him with their terrible empty eyes. "This is how it happens," Timothy said softly. "How we all become hollow. You look into the thin place, and it looks back into you. And then it hollows you out, bit by bit, until there's nothing left but a shell." "My uncle," Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper. "Is he one of us?" Timothy shook his head. No, he was too old, too full of his own life. The thin place only wants the young, the unfinished, or the broken. His hollow gaze seemed to bore into Daniel. the ones with spaces already inside them, waiting to be filled with nothing. Daniel's eyes were drawn back to the circle of darkness in the floor. Despite his terror, he felt a strange pull toward it, an almost irresistible urge to kneel beside it, to reach in and touch the nothingness. With tremendous effort, he tore his gaze away. "I'm leaving," he said, forcing strength into his voice. "Now, get out of my way." The hollow children didn't move. Their silence was answer enough. "I'll break through," Daniel warned. "I'm not afraid to hurt you." Even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. He was terrified of touching these not-quite children, these wet, cold things with emptiness where their souls should be. Timothy's smile returned, knowing and terrible. "You won't leave, Daniel. None of us ever leaves. This is where we belong. In the thin place between what is and what isn't. Between life and whatever comes after." As he spoke, the blue light from the hole began to intensify, pulsing faster, brighter. The temperature in the room plummeted, Daniel's breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. And from the hole, something began to emerge. Not a child this time, not anything human, just darkness given shape. A writhing column of void that rose from the circle like smoke from an inverted chimney. It had no features, no limbs, no face, just an impression of hunger, of patient, ancient want. The hollow children drew back, their expressions changing from empty smiles to something like fear. Even Timothy retreated, pressing against the far wall. Only Daniel remained near the hole, rooted in place by horror and fascination. The darkness sensed him, turning what might have been a head in his direction. Though it had no eyes, he felt it examining him, assessing him, reaching into the broken places inside his mind. "Daniel," it seemed to say, though no sound disturbed the air. "We've been waiting for you." "What are you?" Daniel whispered. "I am the hollow," it replied, "the emptiness at the heart of all things, the void from which you came and to which you will return." The darkness extruded something like a limb, reaching toward him. Daniel tried to back away, but his muscles wouldn't obey. He could only watch as that impossible appendage stretched toward his face. "Let me show you," the darkness said. "Let me show you what waits in the thin place." The limb touched his forehead, right at the scar from the accident. Cold beyond cold seeped into his skin, into his skull, into his thoughts. And suddenly Daniel was elsewhere. He stood on the shore of a vast, still lake, its surface mirroring a sky of impossible colors, violets and greens that no human eye was meant to see. Around the lake's perimeter stretched a forest of pale trees with no leaves, their branches reaching toward the alien sky like supplicating arms. And in the lake, just beneath the surface, moved shapes, human shapes, children, hundreds of them, swimming without breaking the water's surface, their hollow eyes open, their mouths stretched in silent delight. They were neither alive nor dead, neither here nor there. They existed in the liminal space, the thin place between worlds, forever young, forever hollow, forever playing their eternal game. As Daniel watched, the children began to emerge from the lake, water streaming from their pale forms. They approached him, hands extended in welcome, hollow eyes fixed on his face. "Join us," they seemed to say. "Become hollow, become eternal." With a supreme effort of will, Daniel tore himself away from the vision. He was back in the room, the darkness still towering before him, its knot hand still pressed to his forehead. "No," he gasped. "I won't. I choose life. I choose to feel, even if it hurts." The darkness recoiled slightly, as if surprised by his resistance. "But you are already hollow," it insisted. "You have been since the night your wife died. Since you walked away from the crash that should have taken you both." "That's not true," Daniel said, but doubt crept into his voice. Ever since the accident, he'd felt empty, numb, going through the motions of life without really living, working until exhaustion claimed him, drinking to dull the pain, pushing away anyone who tried to get close. "You know it is true," the darkness pressed. "You've been waiting for this, seeking it. Why else would you come to the thin place? Why else would you open doors better left closed?" Daniel had no answer. The darkness was right. He had been hollow, had been seeking something to fill the void Ellen's death had left, had been half in love with the idea of his own end, but not like this, not to become one of these eternal, empty children, playing forever in a lake of nothing. "I want to live," he whispered, and realized with shock that it was true. For the first time since the accident, he felt the stirring of genuine desire for life. Not just existence, but life with all its pain and joy and messy complexity. The darkness sensed his resolve and drew back slightly. "It is too late," it said, but there was uncertainty in its voiceless communication. "You are already marked, already partially hollow." "No," Daniel said, stronger now. "I'm not hollow. I'm wounded. There's a difference." He reached up and gripped the darkness's appendage, intending to push it away from his face. But instead of insubstantial shadow, his fingers closed around something solid, something that felt like a small, cold hand. Daniel looked down to see that he was holding not darkness but Timothy's hand. The boy's hollow eyes widened in surprise. "Let go," Timothy hissed. "You don't understand what you're doing." But Daniel held tight. Some instinct told him that this connection, this touch, was important, that it represented a choice. "I understand exactly what I'm doing," he said. "I'm choosing to feel, to hurt, to heal, to live." As he spoke, something changed in Timothy's eyes. The hollowness seemed to flicker like a television losing signal. For just an instant, Daniel saw not empty tunnels but real eyes, brown, frightened, and very human. "Help me," Timothy whispered, his voice suddenly that of a terrified child rather than an ageless hollow thing. "Please, I don't want to be here anymore." The other hollow children surged forward, reaching for Timothy with urgent, grasping hands. The darkness, too, began to contract, pulling back toward the hole in the floor. "No!" A chorus of childish voices wailed. "He belongs to us. He belongs to the hollow." Daniel pulled Timothy toward him, shielding the boy with his body. "Not anymore," he said firmly. "None of us do." The room erupted into chaos. The hollow children clawed at Daniel, their cold, wet hands leaving trails of lake water on his clothes, his skin. The darkness writhed and pulsed, stretching toward them like a living shadow. The blue light from the hole flared painfully bright, then began to strobe erratically. Timothy clung to Daniel, his small body trembling. "Make it stop," he begged. "Please make it stop." Daniel looked wildly around the room for escape. The doorway was blocked by hollow children. The windows were too small for him to fit through, especially carrying Timothy. That left. His gaze fell on Wallace's journal, which he'd brought upstairs without realizing it. It lay open on the floor where he must have dropped it when the darkness touched him. Something in there, something that might help. With one arm still wrapped protectively around Timothy, Daniel lunged for the journal, scattering hollow children in his path. He snatched it up, flipping frantically through the pages, looking for what? He didn't know until he saw it. A diagram his uncle had drawn, a circle inscribed with symbols Daniel didn't recognize. Beneath it, Wallace had written, "To close the thin place. A binding ritual from the Abenaki. Requires blood of the bloodline. Never had the courage to try it. Blood of the bloodline. Family blood." Without hesitation, Daniel bit down hard on his lower lip, tasting copper as his teeth broke the skin. Blood welled, dripped down his chin. The hollow children shrieked, a sound like wind through dead trees. The darkness contracted further, pulling back toward the hole, dragging several of the children with it. Daniel wiped blood from his chin and, still holding Timothy close, began to trace the symbols from the journal around the circumference of the hole. His finger left crimson streaks on the bare wood. As he worked, the blue light flickered and dimmed. The hollow children retreated, pressing themselves against the walls, watching with their empty eyes as Daniel completed the circle of symbols. "What now?" Timothy whispered. Daniel didn't know. The journal mentioned no words, no final gestures, just the symbols and the blood. But something was happening. The symbols he'd drawn in blood began to glow with a reddish light, distinct from the blue emanating from the hole. Where the two lights met, they seemed to cancel each other out, creating expanding patches of normal darkness. The hollow children began to fade, their forms becoming transparent, insubstantial. Some cried out in fear, others in what sounded like relief. One by one, they vanished like morning mist, until only Timothy remained. The boy looked up at Daniel, his eyes. Real eyes now, brown and scared and human, filling with tears. "I don't want to go," he said. "Not back there. Not to the lake." Daniel held him tighter. "You won't," he promised, though he had no idea if he could keep that promise. "I won't let you." The hole in the floor had begun to shrink, the darkness retreating into it like water down a drain. The blue light sputtered and dimmed as the opening contracted. Timothy's body grew lighter in Daniel's arms, more transparent with each passing second. "I'm scared," he whispered. "I know," Daniel said. "Me too. But being scared is part of being alive. It means you're not hollow anymore." Timothy managed a small, brave smile. "Thank you," he said, his voice fading along with his form, "for not leaving me there, for bringing me back." And then he was gone, leaving Daniel holding nothing but empty air. The hole in the floor gave one final violent pulse of blue light, then snapped shut with a sound like a thunderclap. The room was plunged into darkness. Daniel fumbled for his phone, turning on its flashlight. The beam swept across the empty room. The floor was solid now, no sign of the hole that had been there minutes before. The children's drawings still covered the walls, but they were different now. Normal drawings of houses, trees, smiling stick figures with proper faces instead of hollow eyes. Exhausted beyond measure, Daniel sank to the floor, his back against the wall. He touched his lip, finding it swollen but no longer bleeding. Had it all been real? The hollow children, the darkness, Timothy's rescue? He couldn't be sure, but something had changed, not just in the house, but in him. The numbness that had encased him since Ellen's death had cracked, allowing feeling to seep back in. Pain, yes, but also relief. Hope, even. He raised the phone's light to examine the walls more closely. Among the children's drawings, something caught his eye. A family portrait done in crayon. Two tall figures labeled Mom and Dad. And between them, a small figure labeled Timothy. But there was a fourth figure too, standing slightly apart. An adult man with unruly hair and a scar on his temple. Beneath it, in a child's uneven printing, was written, "Uncle Daniel." Daniel stared at the drawing, his throat tight with emotion. Somehow, impossibly, he had changed the past. Or perhaps he had simply healed it, closing the thin place not just in the physical world but in time itself. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. Dawn was breaking over Millhaven, golden light spilling through the window. The house creaked and settled around him, but the sounds were different now. Not ominous, but merely the normal voices of an old house greeting the morning. Daniel climbed slowly to his feet, his body aching as if he'd run a marathon. He made his way downstairs to the kitchen, where he put on a pot of coffee and watched the sun rise over what was now truly his home. On the kitchen table lay a small green toy soldier, both arms intact, paint bright and new. Daniel picked it up, turning it over in his hand. It was no longer cold to the touch, no longer wrong somehow. Just a toy, left behind by a boy who had finally found peace. "Goodbye, Timothy," he said softly. The house creaked once in response, the sound almost like a child's voice saying goodbye, then silence, but not the hollow kind. The full, rich silence of a home waiting to be lived in again. Daniel smiled and raised his coffee mug in a toast to the morning light, to the end of hollowness, to the beginning of whatever came next. The end.